called their side Saint-Domingue, and the Spaniards kept Hispaniola for theirs, but called the capital city Santo Domingo, which is still Saint-Domingue.
When the Spanish got here in 1492, and you know, they're on the island from 1492 to 1625, the Spanish is looking for gold. They're looking for wealth, and this is the first thing they started doing. And they find some gold. Haiti still produces gold today. And so gold was the big prize that everybody's looking for. But once they get into sugarcane was sweet gold. I mean, sugarcane was it.
During the period where they were commencing this genocide against the indigenous population, a priest called Bartholomew de las Casas came up with this idea that it was to do what they were deciding that Hispaniola, they were killing them off. It was terrible, which it was, incredibly brutal. So they needed someone else to do it to. And this was where he came up with the idea of getting people from elsewhere.
This revolution will be more of what Africans do. This revolution is very important to understand, because what also happened is that when Africans were brought to this island, many of the warriors from the Congo, from Yoruba, or what we call Nigeria, or from Ghana, when they were brought here, the Ashanti, they immediately escaped and created maroon towns. These maroon towns would later become the actual.
Well, I graduated in '86, and when I used to like come to school, used to be like come to school for me to go, not as a teacher or anything. It was like a week after we got out of school.
In Europe, came from that part of the world, came from that island. The coffee that went to Europe came from that island.
There's nothing that happens after the Haitian Revolution in our fight for freedom across the Caribbean in North and South America that wasn't influenced by the Haitian Revolution.
The African people on the island fought all the largest armies of the world at the time and won over each one of them. Whooped the Spaniards, beat up the French, knocked down the British.
The Haitians have a pride about them. The revolution is the most important thing to them. The first thing they instill in you is that you are the first Black Republic.
1804 becomes important because it's the date at which the implementation of the dream of real revolution and real equality
at in high school, the high school I went to was more like a college, where you could walk on and walk off. I mean, it was open environment. It was like you are in charge of yourself. So
victories. But when
you didn't have the police us in high school, not my high school.
They framed the
I went to a university
school
though.
Africans
so
everywhere there
it was a lot different from the year before that. I went to I went 2 years of performing arts.
That enslaved population actually overthrew.
Yeah, we had an open campus. Girl, we had a courtyard where you could like just lay out in the courtyard and study and stuff, or lunch, or whatever you wanted to do. We had a really nice, you know how high school is. We had a really open environment. I really liked my high school, my final year of high school.
There's nothing
I
that
liked
happens
school,
after
period,
the Haitian
because
Revolution
I used to go to
in
school
our
every
fight for
day.
freedom across the Caribbean and North and South America that wasn't influenced.
Only
by
when
the
I
Haitian
got
Revolution.
older, like
The African
senior and
people
stuff,
on the
did I had a car,
all
so I
the
would.
largest armies of the
Now, you know,
world at the
senior
time.
skip days. Did you guys
And
have
won
senior
over each one
skip
of them.
days and stuff like that?
Whooped
Hey,
the
it's
Spaniards, beat up the French.
yeah,
knocked down
man.
the
We used
British.
to have
The Haitians have a pride about them. The revolution is the most important thing to them. The first thing they instill in you is that you are the first Black Republic.
1804 becomes important because it's the date at which the implementation of the dream of real revolution and real equality and new nation status and the ability to defend your new nation is manifest.
When you look at modern historians, when they talk about victories that Europeans had over non-white people, they always frame the narrative as victories. But when African people rise up and fight off their European oppressors, they frame the narrative as a massacre.
Africans everywhere that were enslaved resisted it. Haiti becomes significant because it was the first time in human history that an enslaved population actually overthrew their oppressors.
The Haitian Revolution, though, was the most organized, the most large scale, the most impressive in terms of structure and complication from the very beginning.
Haiti made more money for France than all 13 colonies.
The Haitian Revolution was very influential, particularly amongst Africans. It was seen as an inspiration for Africans in this hemisphere, just as it was seen as a horror by those who held slavery here.
There is a concept that we must defeat Haiti. We must ground them into the ground. We can never let them rise. They are an example of Black power. They are an example of what happens when people who are oppressed decide to stop being oppressed.
The island of Hispaniola is one of the oldest islands in the Western Hemisphere. The island is very strategic because it has a lot of natural resources, it has a lot of precious metals, and a lot of the European powers were scrambling to get control of that area.
Haiti is the first place that Christopher Columbus did a fort, did a settlement. So it's the first settlement in the Americas.
Christopher Columbus on the west coast of Africa in 1482. He's involved with Africans on the west coast. That is how he came to America in the first place. It was they who told him there was land to the west. In fact, in his journals, he says that he met Africans going back to Africa when he was on his way to America.
What folks are doing these days shows that there were Africans on that island when Columbus got there. At least 3 different types. There were the Caracoles up in the north, Guanini, and but you can find that in the book called The Annals of Haiti.
The Spanish declared this was for them, but the French says, what do you mean this is for you? And the British said, well, how could you have it all? So right from the beginning, we had colonial wars among them on the island.
When you're dealing with the Spaniards, you're looking at the introduction of Africans in 1503. When you're looking at the introduction of Africans from the French, you're looking at 1670. So you're looking at a wide gap between the Spaniards and the French bringing Africans onto this island. Well, what happened on that island was that they brought a culture that was deeply steeped in what is probably the most important liberating force that any human can have, and that is in spirituality.
1675, the Treaty of Ryswick, the church established that the island would be split in 2. One side would be for the Spaniards, and the other side would be for the French. So at that point, what the Spaniards had named the island, I told you, was already Haiti. That's the original name of the island. Now, the Spaniards named the island Hispaniola. And when they agreed to share it with French, the French called their side Saint-Domingue, and the Spaniards kept Hispaniola for theirs, but called the capital city Santo Domingo, which is still Saint-Domingue.
When the Spanish got here in 1492, and they're on the island from 1492 to 1625, the Spanish is looking for gold. They're looking for wealth, and this is the first thing they started doing. And they find some gold. Haiti still produces gold today, and so gold was the big prize that everybody's looking for. But once they get into sugarcane was sweet gold. I mean, sugarcane was it.
During the period where they were commencing this genocide against the indigenous population, a priest called Bartholomew de las Casas came up with this idea that it was ungodly to do what they were doing to the indigenous people of Hispaniola and then killing them off. It was terrible, which it was, incredibly brutal. So they needed someone else to do it. And this was where he came up with the idea of getting people from elsewhere.
This revolution was going on from the moment Africans touched the shores. That's very important to understand, because what also happened is that when Africans were brought to this island, many of the warriors from the Congo, from Yoruba, or what we call Nigeria, or from Ghana, when they were brought here, the Ashanti, they immediately escaped and created maroon towns. These maroon towns would later become the actual hubs of the revolutions because many of them never really experienced being enslaved. The great majority of sugar that was consumed in Europe came from that part of the world, came from that island. The coffee that went to Europe came from that island.
That colony that the Spanish founded, taken by the French, eventually became the most profitable colony in the Americas, and arguably, depending which economist you consult, the most profitable colony in the world at the time. It became a centerpiece of the transatlantic slave system. It became what gave France its supremacy over Britain in the 18th century. I mean, this island, it's impossible to overstate the economic importance of the island in the period we're talking about. It produced more profit than all of North America combined.
This was a wealth that was largely born by sugar, which was not only an item used to sweeten your tea and coffee, but it was also a marker of class. It was seen as a sign of sophistication when one used sugar. And in certain circles, it was even seen as a miracle drug of some sorts. And that helped to generate tremendous amounts of wealth on the island of Hispaniola, which is one of the reasons why the French, ultimately backed by the United States, fought so fiercely to retain that island.
Because, I mean, the life expectancy in Jamaica or Haiti, for example, was often between 3 and 7 years. So once you arrived on the island, you were worked to death on average between 3 and 7 years. I mean, it's genocide. And so that was what contributed, the type of torture. Because the white population was so much smaller than, say, on mainland America, vis-a-vis the black population, the paranoia was worse. And therefore, the types of punishment, the types of torture, the extremity of the slave regime was much more severe in the Caribbean.
Taking pregnant women, crucify them, split their belly open enough so they will have a game. People are going to bet who's going to die first, the baby or the mother.
The reason why there was more rebellions in Jamaica and in the Caribbean in general was a number of factors. One, conditions were much worse. And I don't say that in any way to denigrate or downplay how brutal conditions were in America, but we can see this from the fact that the slavery was so bad in the Caribbean that the populations were not even able to reproduce themselves. So constantly new populations had to be brought from Africa.
And one of the things they used to do is bury us alive on an anthill, leaving your head so that you would slowly get tortured to death by ants eating your skull.
First of all, let's be clear, the rebellions against slavery started in Africa. And the rebellions against slavery in Africa are probably the most under-discussed and underrepresented element of the whole history. Everyone tells you that Africans collaborated, which is true. What they don't tell you about is those Africans that rebelled. And in fact, scholars estimate now that it has been studied thoroughly, that the rebellions in Africa alone, of which there were hundreds, prevented perhaps 1 million people from crossing the Atlantic.
And one of the ways the planters kept control of Haiti was either to rape or have a child with a black woman, and then send that child to Europe to be educated, and then bring them back, and they became the overseers.
But all Africans that were enslaved understood that their natural state of being human was to be free in Africa. Those two things always went together.
In the Caribbean, because there was a concentration of sugar plantations, which was the most brutal form of slavery, worse than cotton or indigo or coffee or tobacco, it was the most labor intensive. And also the number of Africans versus the number of Europeans was much higher in the Caribbean. And then you have, of course, terrain. So island like Jamaica, island like Haiti, very mountainous, lend themselves to guerrilla warfare. Then you have strange political coincidences. So like during the years preceding the Haitian Revolution, there was a civil war in Africa in the Congo. So a lot of the Africans, Congolese, that ended up being Maroons in Haiti were African war veterans. They were militarily trained personnel back in Africa.
With the Haitian Revolution, there were 4 principal players in regards to the leadership of the Haitian Revolution. The first one was Macandal.
Macandal is considered to be the precursor to the 1791 beginning, because Macandal was an enslaved African who worked at a plantation, and then he died in 1757 or 1758. But he freed himself. Right. Some people say that, you know, he had lost one arm in a sugar mill accident. But essentially, the legend of Macandal is interesting because he foretold what would happen with regards to the Haitian Revolution?
He was this extraordinary herbalist. And what he did, he taught the people of Haiti, the Africans, how to use the herbs and fauna in the ecology that they're now in to poison the food of the white farmers. And he was very successful.
And so Makadal went, took to the hills, and he would teach the kitchen people how to poison their masters.
They had nature on their side, and that's very important. They used nature as one of their greatest weapons. They knew the terrain, they understood the terrain, they understood botany, they understood toxicology, they understood poisons, they understood, and that's what Voodoo is. Voodoo is a science. Voodoo is not just a spiritual system.
The Bafioti means the black collaborators. They had to get them out of their face first. Makandal, what he's really known, a lot of what he went after them first. Before he poisoned the European, he poisoned the black collaborators. So they were all house Negroes. Come on.
And one thing about Makandal, he realized this. He understood that the black collaborators, we call them coons today, how they will sabotage black progress in order to get individual trinkets. So Makandal, he saw that early on. So when it came to poisoning the white supremacists, Makandal, he understood that we got to get rid of these collaborators first. So he poisoned many of the black collaborators before he started to poison the white slave owners.
If you look at the statutes, the laws of a place like Georgia in the 1750s, contemporaneous with that revolt on Hispaniola, you'll find laws that are specifically seeking to restrain Africans from getting knowledge of plants because it was feared that they had in mind a plot or a conspiracy similar to what unfolded in what is now Haiti in the 1750s.
See, African people used strategies that they knew would work. Makandal, another great revolutionary, he poisoned the French. And the women were the ones that poisoned them when they would prepare foods. He killed over 6,000 European Frenchmen.
When the enslaved Africans were finished with their work, he went down to talk to them. Like he would always go down and talk to them. And at one night, he took out 3 handkerchiefs, a yellow handkerchief, a white handkerchief, and a black handkerchief. And he said to the audience, in terms of storytelling, because that's how we give information through stories. So he took out the first handkerchief and he said to the enslaved Africans, first handkerchief was yellow. He says, these are the people that owned this island before Columbus came. And they were totally annihilated. Then he took out the white. He says, the white handkerchief, these are the folks that, annihilated the Tainos. And then he took out the black handkerchief. And this is the prophecy. He says, we Africans are going to avenge the Taino folks, and we're going to get these white folks out of Haiti.
And so Makandal used his science, and I think he was a kind of pharmacologist in modern terms, but he used his science of understanding the natural world to begin to talk about how do we take that knowledge and free ourselves. And Makandal, he's sort of the spark of the Haitian Revolution.
When you look at many of the people coming up out of this system, for instance, Makandal was a preacher. And Makandal was a preacher who told his people and the people around him that he had visions. There's such a connection between Makandal and Nat Turner as it relates to the work that they were doing.
Makandal understood the problem with the collaborators. And unfortunately, it was a black collaborator who turned Makandal in, who turned on him. And the French captured Makandal and they were going to burn him alive. When Makandal was about to die, he made a very strange prediction. Makandal said, I'm coming back as a mosquito. Now, a lot of people didn't know what that meant. Years later, when the French came to invade the island, there was a certain number of French troops, thousands of them, who were killed by malaria brought on by mosquitoes. Now, the malaria skipped over the Africans because they were immune to the malaria. But the Makandal prediction definitely came true. That just showed how spiritually in touch they were. The next Haitian leader who was instrumental in the Haitian Revolution was a voodoo priest from Jamaica named Duddy Bookman.
So Bookman appears to be one of these persons who's leading resistance in Jamaica. The British, not wanting to martyr him, sells him to the French in Haiti because the French is known for breaking black folks. Jamaica was supposed to be the place where that was done, but the French is supposed to be really strategic at this and good at this.
Bookman is the child of a woman whose name I don't have yet, who was a big-time revolutionary in Jamaica. And her son was sold to Saint-Domingue as punishment to the mother. So he was about 13, 14 when he was sold over here. And they seem to have been Muslims. He talks a lot about the Quran. And in fact, he's named Bookman because he had a small Quran tied to his waist. And at some point they realized that. And when he refused to give it to the colonizers and slavers, they burnt the book on him, with him. So he was all burnt up. And then to mock him, named him Bookman.
Bookman and another enslaved African woman named Cecilia Fatima began the planning stages of the revolution. They went around the island and they organized a Congress to participate in the infamous Bois Cayman voodoo ceremony that occurred in an alligator swamp.
Cecile Fatima had gone around for about 4 years to bring that Congress together. She had gone around the whole entire island to bring that Congress together.
And as much as many people talk about that meeting in the alligator swamp, that Bookman called for the prayer, but it wasn't Bookman that called that congregation together. And it wasn't done in an instant. It was months of organizing and building up. And the person who was leading this organization was a Mambo, a female priestess by the name of Cecilia Fatima.
It should not be seen as surprising that some of the leading figures of the revolutionary process were said to be either believers or practitioners of this New World belief system that we refer to as Vodun or Voodoo.
I like to share with my students. Think about what master you must have if you decide to hold your meeting in a swamp of alligators.
This kind of going so far as to take the life of your oppressor is already there. And the place where that meeting took place, the alligator swamp, that was a place the whites didn't go in because they were really alligators up in there. So very few people could go in and come out. But the black folks had a different relationship with the ecology than whites had. They mastered having this relationship. The whole concept of the Yoruba religion is to know and understand the forces of nature.
When you're trying to get free, it's very important to create your own identity. When you want to oppress somebody, the thing you do, you change their name, you change their religion, you change their language. And the Haitians understood that they needed their own language. This is why they speak the French Creole. That's a form of their own language. They knew that they had to go back to their own religion. They went back to voodoo. And there were people who were Catholic. There were people who were Christian. There were people who were different religions, but they went back to voodoo, and that codified everybody.
It was an African spiritual force that brought the people together. And when African people were brought together, it gave them a common goal. When they had a common goal, then they knew the common enemy. And then they would take care of their own business.
And voodoo is not just a religion. I mean, Africans didn't really have religions. They had a way of life that at best you can call their sacred science in dealing with cosmology and ecology.
Intentionality was to make our stuff so fearful and so evil and so scary that we run away from it. You know, and so all you gotta say is that, you know, when I was growing up, if I met a lady and I asked her where she's from, she said she's from Louisiana, I'd be backing out. Oh, she might know voodoo. You know, she'll put something in my soup. She could do some people. See, that just make us afraid of our own stuff.
We ain't talking about no Dracula movies here, no zombies. We're basically talking about Africanism. We're talking about people that understand the strengths of plants and of nature and how to, you know, outwit a militia by using what the gods have provided you on this earth.
So you call upon lowers to meet the task that you're confronted with. if you're engaging in war, you would call upon a Loa that has the characters and qualities and dispositions of being warlike or strong and strength and fearless.
Dying was an opportunity to go back to the ancestors, to Guinea, right? So there was no fear.
Through science and through faith and through the will of not fearing death. Most Haitians don't fear death. They don't.
A lot of Haitians, they say, don't fear death. So when you look at a lot of rappers now, a lot of rappers here in America, they will have Haitian gangsters in their entourages. And a lot of these dudes will have that Haitian muscle behind them. So this just shows the kind of respect and even fear that a lot of people still have for that Haitian rebel.
I mean, imagine if you're not scared of death, you're not going to be a good slave. And this is one of the reasons Christianity preached suicide is a sin. Yeah, one of the reasons that you get your reward. You get your reward in the afterlife, but only if you're a good slave.
It really is a science of the spirit, and that this voodoo that they demonized, the demonization of it was intentional because they wanted to separate us from the very thing that gave us power.
Let's be clear. A lot of African spiritual systems believed in what we call the transmigration of the soul. So they believe that the soul is eternal. This was very problematic for people you want to enslave. Again, coming back to before we even get to Haiti, in Africa itself, there are copious records from Europeans writing about slavery. Africans jumping in the sea. I'd rather dead than be a slave. Consistent. And particular groups, so the Igbo of Nigeria, who are a group that very much believed in the transmigration of the soul, they were one of the groups that is recorded by Europeans were most likely to commit suicide because they believed they'd be reborn in Africa. They believed that their soul lived forever. So I'd rather die than this stuff.
There is a cultural, spiritual unity that unites Africans and it gives them power. Even today in the African American community, it is the church that is the most powerful. And when anybody wants to sway the people, they always bring pastors in because they understand the pastors have the ear of the congregation and the people in the community.
We don't know shocking when you said rise and dead when talk about Jesus Christ. You know, they say they can have Jesus rising, we can have my mama rising.
I had a heart attack some years ago, but 7 years ago, something called ventricular tachycardia. Heart beating too fast, it won't stop because I'm always doing stuff, you know. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. So finally they came one morning and said, Mr. Small, we're going to bring in the electrician. So I said, no, y'all full of joke. He said, oh no, we're going to bring in the electricians because they have doctors who are human electricians. And their job is to measure the electrical current that goes from your brain to your heart and to your other organs, and to look at the relationship to the electrical current in your body and how much is it being interfered with from things outside of your body. Does that sound like voodoo to you? So that's what voodoo is talking about. And while on one hand, we deny it when we talk about voodoo, but here in our highest science, it is proven to be reality.
So the Africans had absolutely no fear because they knew that this was a transformation, that it is how you live that matters, not how you die.
The concept of zombies comes from Vodun. It's an African concept. And it's not about the living dead. It's about worshiping the ancestors, praising the ancestors. But the white supremacists, they flip that into something demonic where people are going to come out the ground and walk around and get you. And that's that boogeyman concept that they've created because of the Haitians rising up and getting revenge. And that's always been a scary thing for the white supremacists, African people rising up, getting revenge on them. That's the zombie mentality that they've created because that's their fear. When you look at the old zombie movies back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, they would actually use Africans and Haitians as zombies.
And out of their West Indian island comes a tale of terror and voodoo, of witchcraft and zombies, and all the weird black magic that the white man seldom sees.
All of those old zombie movies had voodoo themes, so they were very open about it then.
You see, the thing about Duddy Boukman was he was so intelligent, he knew that he might not get it because he did get captured and he was executed. But the revolution continued with the people. And that's another lesson I learned about the Haitian Revolution. It wasn't so much the leaders, it was the people. The people never gave up the spirit. To this very day, they still have the spirit.
Boukman is known for 3 or 4 things. Number 1 is the Bookman's prayer. You know, the God who created the earth, who created the sun that gives us light, the God that watches us from the clouds, the God that holds up the ocean. Our God has seen what the white man has done to us. Our God wants us to do good. The God of the white man wants him to do crimes. It's our God who will give us the strength and the courage to beat this white man.
So now this is the man who's going to rise from this. This thing is going to rise and say to us on August 14, 1791, the God who created the world, who make the waves move in the ocean, he is your father. He is with you and will give you his strength. But you must act and free yourself.
Duddy Boukman is very intelligent. He is one of the leaders of the African people. He's very respected. And what he's going to do is he's going to devise a plan. And he is going to incorporate the ceremony of Ogun, the god of war. And he is going to assemble the forces. And he is going to instill in them a spirit of revolution.
And the last sentence is a pretty long thing. And the last sentence, he says, listen to the voice of freedom. It speaks in each one of your hearts. When they ask him, but who will lead us in this battle? He says, the leader is inside you. You are the general and you are the soldier. Now get to work.
He comes from the form of just total understanding of what war is. There is no conceptual framework of peace. You don't call on Ogun for peace. You don't call on him for negotiation. You call on him when everything has been done that you've tried to do. You've been as diplomatic as you possibly can. But now it's time to get busy.
I have not seen anywhere where there's some text in Voodoo that says, forgive and forget.
Black people and African people globally, we have this Jedi mind trick that's ran on us by the white supremacists where they can mistreat, subjugate, maldistribute the resources, harm, and oppress, and then tell us we should forgive them because this passage in the Bible says so. And that's a trick that African people have been falling for a long time. And the Haitian people, they didn't fall for that. They went to their old spiritual system. They went to African spiritual systems. They went to the voodoo. And in voodoo, there is no concept of forgiveness. And that's the thing that scared the white supremacists. And we got to stop falling for their mind tricks when they harm and oppress us and then tell us to forgive them. We got to start thinking in terms of our African spiritual systems and in terms of survival.
So we meet in those different places in the forest. And one question has to be debated. What can we do so our children and our grandchildren do not have to suffer what we suffer here? And this is the night the decision was taken. There is no two ways. This man only understands force. So only with force can we talk back to him. And some people started saying, well, but we don't have boats, we don't have guns, we don't have this, we don't have that. And one of the answers that was given is God has never created a creature and not give you a way to fight. You sit on a stone, it is a tool while it's holding your body. But when you are attacked, you have your weapon under your butt. Use it.
When it comes to guerrilla warfare, and this is what the Haitian Revolution is a lesson in, we have to understand how guerrilla warfare works. When you're going up against a superpower, you can't go head up. You have to attack the flanks. You have to attack from the back. And you have to learn how to weaponize everything. So the Haitians, they learned how to weaponize nature, weaponize rocks, weaponize trees, weaponize animals. Understand that, because when they had the first voodoo ceremony, they had that in an alligator swamp. Now, they knew that the white supremacists weren't going to no alligator swamp, but they were just so in touch with nature, they knew they needed to weaponize everything.
Once you get to the point where you're going to do this, what you're actually doing is you are bringing the God of war within you. And every one of us as human beings has the God of war in us. We many times tried to keep him down.
The War Council was August 14th. They decided the revolution would start a week from there. A lot of those Africans did not speak the same language. They all came from different spaces, and a lot of them didn't know how to count. When would the revolution? So each were given another. This is another. I do this also. Each were given 7 stones. Everybody at Boakaima, and then they went back to their spaces, the plantation. Every morning they were supposed to let one go. When there was no more stones in your hand, then Kupetet Bulikai, burn it all down.
Pat Robertson said that the devil was conjured up by the Haitians, and they had a devil worshiping ceremony, and the devil killed all the French and killed all the whites on the island, which is a lie, by the way. They did not kill all the white people on the island. That's another big propaganda lie that they like to promote.
Something happened a long time ago in Haiti, and people may not want to talk about it. They were under the heel of the French, Napoleon III and whatever. And they got together and swore a pact to the devil. They said, we will serve you if you'll get us free from the French. It's a true story. And so the devil said, okay, it's a deal. And they kicked the French out. The Haitians revolted and got themselves free. But ever since, they have been cursed by one thing after the other, desperately poor.
Pat Robertson said that Satan came up, killed all the white people, and the Haitians have been cursed ever since. And that just shows how racially insecure do you have to be. You would rather give props to Satan. You would rather give credit to Satan than a group of African people who really put in the work and got rid of the French.
The night originally chosen to start the Haitian Revolution. So we remember the Haitian Revolution, August the 22nd, August the 23rd, right? The original plan was to start on the 24th. The reason the 24th was chosen was because on the 25th, the entire government was meeting the next day. So the ambition from the beginning was to kill the entire government and take over the island. The only reason the revolution had to start earlier, the rebellion had to start earlier, was because on the 21st, somebody struck early and slave masters captured someone, tortured someone, and were warned that there was a rebellion coming. So they decided to strike early.
It's like asking the question, how did the Vietnamese defeat the reigning superpower of the United States of America? And part of that answer rests with the question of guerrilla warfare. That is to say, trying to avoid, whenever necessary, face-to-face confrontations of one military brigade facing another military brigade, but harassing the invading forces, who, after all, oftentimes are not very familiar with the geography.
So there was a dinner that happened a week before what came on ceremony. And actually, it's now, scholars say, that's where the rebellion was planned. So it wasn't like they planned it on the spur of the moment on the night of the 22nd. The main leaders sat down and planned a week before, maybe months before that, had their dinner. The crazy part about it is that the Europeans knew that their privileged slaves were meeting for dinner, and they didn't think anything of it. They were so utterly convinced that black people were never going to do anything about their situation, could never overthrow them. They could never be defeated by a bunch of lazy, backwards niggers from Africa, that they got complacent.
How to be able to create bamboo, knives, how to have blow darts. All of these things they used against these forces because these forces could not fight a guerrilla type warfare.
So with the martial arts and the idea of the fighting, whether if we're talking about Brazil, capoeira, or the motions of if we go to a voodoo ceremony and you see how they work with spears in different ways, or we go to the Amazons and you see how it's applied, it's the philosophy, the genesis of it all is a form of worship where even if the slave master comes, it more looks like it's a celebration of parties and different things going on. So it's not intimidating. But at the same time, it forms a form of martial arts, a form of self-defense, where when it's time to rise for the revolution, the masters didn't even know that you was already training a bunch of troops and now you're ready to go.
Bookman wore on the colony and occupied more than a third of the colony. Every activity was stopped. Everybody had only one thing: find Bookman and stop this. And we had no weapons. They had the guns. They had the cannons. They had everything. And yet, the fear.
So Bookman, one of the great leaders, he was eventually captured. He was eventually killed. And when they got Bookman, they wanted to make an example out of Bookman so they could scare all the other people from rebelling. So the legend was they got Bookman's head, decapitated him, and put his head on a stick and put it out in the public so that everybody could see it as a way to scare them. But at this point, people got rid of that fear of dying. So the rumor was people would walk past the head, see the head and say, they rub their head and say, we're going to carry on the revolution.
One of the fascinating things about the Haitian Revolution is how little pride human beings outside the African diaspora have taken in it, which is fascinating to me, because this is an event of universal human significance, the only successful slave revolution in the whole history of humanity. In all the millennia of slavery, they've been from Greece to Rome to the Ottomans to the Abbasids. No one's ever had a successful slave revolution.
The next Haitian leader who would take the revolution to the next level was the great Toussaint Louverture.
He was raised by a woman from Dahomey. A lot of our people who were born here learned to speak different African languages and got the history of the places that whoever was teaching them came from. Toussaint might not have been from Dahomey, but being that the African woman who adopted him here was from Dahomey, then he's trained and raised as a Dahomean.
If you come from Africa, you have a militaristic aspect to your environment. Dahomey, as we know today, Benin, was one of the most warlike culture. That's where we get the term Amazon women, Amazon warriors, because of the women warriors of Dahomey. On television, they make you think Amazon women will come from someplace else. But these are you go to Benin and you can go to the museum and see statues of these women and so forth. These women warriors.
Toussaint is born on May 20th. Has a very different, even in slavery, their experience is very different. He was a submissive person in slavery. He had slavers who kind of like him.
It was believed that Toussaint Louverture had been free from the age of 45. We now know he was free from about the age of 30. So he'd been a free, privileged African, if you like, in as much as that can be the case in a slave society, for quite a long time before the revolution. He was heavily Christian. He could read and write. He was very Europeanized. And in many ways, that determined his leadership, his experience of slavery, which was said to be, say, less harsh than someone like Dessalines, and his being free for so long. He constantly tried to placate or make peace with France.
Toussaint was an enslaved African who became a free African at some point in the process. I don't know whether he bought his way out of freedom or was granted manumission, because all of the slave society seemed to have put in place some process of manumission for the enslaved persons. And so he became a member of the French military. And he was the first African to become a general in the French military.
He became a great general. But what he's noted for is that before he even went into fighting, he made sure that his enslavers were off to America. Okay, because he didn't kill them. And he always really, really had an affinity for the French.
He was operating in very difficult circumstances. I mean, it's not as if Black people in Haiti had natural allies in the hemisphere. They had antagonists in the hemisphere. With regard to Cuba, which was controlled by the Spanish, that was an antagonist. With regard to Jamaica, controlled by the British, that was an antagonist. Of course, the United States was not altogether friendly. And then, of course, there was the French. And so he was maneuvering, aligning with one power against another power.
In 1802, Napoleon sent one of his generals, Charles Leclerc, over to Haiti so that he could try to bribe Toussaint into turning on some of the other Haitian leaders.
Early on in May 1802, he is speaking to Toussaint. He sent for Toussaint Toussaint came, and in the room there were two chairs, a table. On that table, 1,000,000 francs. And he said to Toussaint, "This money is yours." And Toussaint said, "Well, what do I have to do for it?" He says, "Nothing. Just bring me Dessalines' head." Toussaint put both his arms on the money. And it says, "If it is Dessalines' head that you want, you may as well cut both my arms right now."
He also developed a mindset that I'm respected as a French successful soldier. And so it was to his detriment that he thought that the military relationship that the French had for French soldiers would allow him to survive their imprisonment. And they don't apply that military standard to African peoples.
Napoleon understood that Toussaint wanted to get that respect from the French. Toussaint really, really wanted that respect. Toussaint really wanted to be accepted by the French military. Toussaint wanted to be accepted by the French elite class. And Napoleon saw that, and Napoleon played on that.
So then little by little, Toussaint became the top guy here, period. Militarily and politically. And that's when he's going to do a constitution. He's going to have a constitution written and ban slavery. Of course, that was what brought his demise too. At that point, when Napoleon received the constitution that Toussaint produced here, he is vexed to the last degree and decide that Toussaint must die.
So Napoleon wrote letters to Toussaint inviting him to come over to France so they can negotiate, so they can talk. Napoleon stepped to Toussaint like, "We're the same. We're French generals. We're French military men. We're French." And Toussaint fell for that. And when Toussaint went over there, they captured him, put him in jail, and he died in jail. Now, Dessalines would not fall for that trick. He knew how brutal the white supremacists were.
And of course, you know the sad story of his end, how he goes thinking that he's going to negotiate with his French antagonists, and they arrest him and bundle him off to Europe, where he dies, and where, of course, he utters the immortal words that his death will not stop the revolutionary process. And in fact, he was correct, because it's carried on.
In the course of fighting Leclerc, who was the brother-in-law of Napoleon, who had come down to head one of the armies, Toussaint get captured. I think this is 1803 or 1802, 1803. And then he's taken to France, where he's really starved to death. They said he died of maybe tuberculosis. They starved him to death. And that's when Dessalines assumed the leadership of the army. At this point, the whites, who had now been given a kind of a republican freedom, wants the black folks to go back to the plantation, go back to your status quo. And Dessalines said that's not happening.
So Napoleon is known for exclaiming that it wasn't so much the economic adventure. He said we have to stop the forward movement of blacks in the world. Because remember, when he got into Egypt, and Count Volney wrote his book, Ruins of Empires, telling the French and telling the world, the very same people that we are enslaving and at war with in Haiti and Martinique and St. Lucia and Tobago are the very descendants of the people who built the pyramids that we are copying all their work.
Sent his brother-in-law Leclerc with the new expedition in February 1802 with a clear mission: capture the 10 black generals, send them to France. And once you do that, you can slaughter the entire population of blacks on the island. Don't worry, Africa still has plenty. We'll go back and get more.
Jean-Jacques, at the end of the day, he didn't like the idea of like Toussaint going to France. You know what I mean? It was like, yo, I'm telling you, this is not going to work out. But in the dungeon, though, Toussaint always says something, and they teach us this at a young age. And these are not the exact words, but this is the meaning of it. It's basically, I'm in this dungeon. You could do whatever you want with me, but the seeds already have been planted.
Rochambeau was a French military general, famous even by the standards of 18th century slavery for his incredible brutality. So when the French realized they cannot win back the island, from these rebellious Africans. They decided to embark on a war of extermination. That was the official command. Just exterminate them and we'll replace them with new Africans. So to that end, Rochambeau was tasked with that extermination.
When we think about people being gassed as a form of genocide, the first thing we think about is Nazi Germany. But the first gassing did not happen in Nazi Germany. The first gassing happened in Haiti because the French knew that there was natural sulfur on the island of Haiti. So they got the sulfur. When you burn sulfur, it becomes poisonous. So during the fight, the French put thousands of Africans on ships off the shore, locked them in, and burned the sulfur, and the gases and the fumes killed thousands of people.
Most wicked, vicious, atrocious thing that ever walked on this island. If you wrote a book of 1,000 pages, you couldn't tell all the atrocities that this man performed here, and with pleasure.
Rochambeau, French general, very well respected, very evil, very demonic with the tactics that he used. Napoleon sent him over to Haiti to carry out the genocide campaign. The thing about Rochambeau not only disliked black people, Rochambeau disliked all the mulattoes too. He hated the mulattoes even more than he hated the blacks. So Rochambeau was a real piece of work.
He came into that fort and he didn't reveal what he was going to do. And the people were really, really scared. And they held a festival for him. And it was a couple of days later when they were starting to feel, okay, this guy is not as bad as people have been saying, right? Then he invites them to this ball.
When Rochambeau came to the island, a lot of people didn't know what Rochambeau's agenda was. Nobody really knew anything about him at the time. So when he got to the island, people were kind of sitting back watching to see what he was going to do. So Rochambeau announced that he's going to have a ball, this big party, this grand gala for all the wives of the mulatto soldiers. So at this ball, at this gala, they have this big, luxurious party where they're wining and dining the mulatto free women. You know, they got drinks, they got music, they got food. They're really partying and living it up. The French generals are there. The mulatto women are there. Everybody's just mingling, having a good time. So Rochambeau makes an announcement that he wants to have the women follow him in another room in the house. So he walks down the hallway with the women following him. The women are just, you know, going along with the vibe, going along with the program, going along with the party. They don't know what's happening. They're still giddy, laughing, giggling. Once they get in this other room, Rochambeau announces to the women, hey, I got presents for all of you. So there are these boxes lined up. And there's different variations of this story, but this is the most popular one. So Rochambeau has all of these boxes of presents lined up for the women. So the women are, you know, they're still in a festive party mood. Now they're confused. So they see these boxes and they see Rochambeau announcing that he's giving them gifts. So the women are like, okay, cool. So the women get the boxes. And when they open the boxes, they look inside and they see the decapitated heads of their husbands inside the boxes. So the women are terrified. Rochambeau's standing there laughing, giggling, just laughing his head off because he's letting them know, I don't care about the blacks or you mulattoes, and this is what I'm going to do to all of you while I'm here. That move there made the mulattoes and the blacks come together as a unit against the French.
On the island of Cuba, for some historically unique reason, these dogs have been bred to chase down Africans. And in fact, some of those dogs were imported to North America to chase down Africans. And some of those dogs wound up in Hispaniola to chase down Africans.
And these are the dogs they would send out to chase down black people whose only meal was the flesh of black human beings.
Because one of the things European pseudo-historians have done is, one, said that the enslaved Africans massacred all the white people left on the island at the revolution, at the end of the revolution, which they did not. They massacred all the French. But the whites who fought with them, the Polish and the Germans, as it says expressly in their 1805 constitution, were not only not killed, were now classified as black people. They killed all of the French left on the island, 4,000 or 5,000 people. But these are the same French who just embarked on a war of extermination against them. And remember, there were still French troops on the island. They were just on the other half of the island, what now is the Dominican Republic. So it's not like France stopped posing a threat the moment they got their independence. In fact, not only were French troops in the other half of the island, they were agitating in the other half of the island. So this is the context in which that massacre takes place.
That's basically what the Haitian Revolution was about. Africans dying bravely, whether it was getting boiled, whether it was drowning, gassed, shot, beheaded, burnt at the stake.
We had a culture where swording, fencing was a part of our culture. Lancing, using lances was a part of our culture. Going back even to South Africa with the Zulu nation, when Shaka took a long lance and created this short lance, he created both a spear and a sword. And so that's a part of African culture, going all the way back to ancient Egypt.
A lot of them had military training in African traditions, people freshly arrived from Africa. And then they had the military training of fighting for their different colonial master against another colonial master. But a lot of the tactics they used were what today we'd call guerrilla warfare. They didn't fight in the way, they knew they couldn't defeat a European army of 20,000 people, 80,000 people. They've got much less sophisticated arms, they've got way more arms, etc. In a face-to-face European-style empire versus empire battle. So they used guerrilla warfare, they used raiding techniques.
Primarily, what you have is the people who know their ecology. If you've been to Haiti, Haiti has a terrain of hills and mountains and plateaus. And if you are the African, you live in that every day. You plant there, you till the grounds there, you hunt there. And so you master that terrain.
The sisters, in many ways, supplied the force, created the environment for the men to do what needed to be done. Sisters are very important to any revolution. In fact, ain't nobody having a revolution without women. In fact, if you think you're doing that, it's just a fight. It ain't a revolution.
Sunny Belair, for instance, when they caught her, her husband was General Charles Belair, right? And he negotiated for her release. And you know, these white settlers, they never, they betray whatever. They have no honor, okay? So when he gave himself up, they took both of them, okay? So that's Sanit Belair and Charles Belair, the general. And so they sentenced her to a beheading because she was a woman. And then they sent him to get shot. And she refused. She said, I will die the honorable way with my husband. They wanted to blindfold her. And she said, no, you don't need to blindfold me because I'm a woman.
When they ordered to take her head and put it under, they fought with her and couldn't do it. And in the end, she gave the orders. Soldiers, position. Don't make me wait. Fire!
The Haitian leaders understood that it would not be conducive to them to try to get individual gains to the detriment of the collective society. So they were smart enough to understand, I'm not going to try to get little trinkets for myself while everybody else is suffering under this oppressive system. Enough of them understood that, because in any society you're going to have collaborators, but enough of them understood that we cannot collaborate with these white supremacists because it's not going to be beneficial to us collectively.
Yeah, the Haitian Revolution, the Africans are given a bad rep. These are people who were enslaved. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to own me and buy and sell my children, I'm well within my rights to do absolutely anything to get free from it. And I think all of us looking back 2 centuries hence can see that. If someone tried to sell your children, what would you do? You'd do anything you could do to stop them selling your children. And any self-respecting human would. Why should it be any different 2 centuries ago?
Toussaint Louverture opened the pathway for freedom and independence. But the man who doesn't get enough credit for bringing the revolution to victory is Jean-Jacques Dessalines.
Two different characters, 2 different people who handle things differently. 2 different spirit, I would say also. Because if we take it in our own worldview, in the Voodoo worldview, When you analyze Toussaint, Toussaint is a Legba. Legba is the spirit that comes to open the way and trace the road. When you analyze Dessalines, Dessalines is on a goop. That's the one who comes to make things happen by any means necessary.
But it's also really interesting how people like Jean-Jacques Dessalines become a military genius within the space of 10 or 15 years with no formal military training in the way that we understand it. And that's one of the inexplicable things. But again, it comes down to human intelligence and the human capacity for genius and desire to be free.
Dessalines is definitely not Dahomey. I am certain of it. But it is a Dahomean woman who taught him Yoruba and taught him how to fight, how to do his Tantoya, who raised him. And not just any woman, it was a military woman, because Dahomey had two armies, a female army and a male army. And this woman was an officer in the female army of Dahomey when she was captured and brought into slavery. So she went right into work to raise some of the young ones that she, in a certain way, adopted. And Dessalines seemed to be her prized.
Tantoya is significant because she taught the greatest hero to ever live how to do hand-to-hand combat when he was a teenager, how to shoot. She taught him everything he knew, because he was enslaved. But she had come from a warrior background.
I don't recall seeing anywhere where Toussaint was beaten, whereas Dessalines was constant. His entire back was whooped with scars that healed and hurt again and healed, and huge big blobs of scars all over his back.
And Dessalines, as opposed to Toussaint, did not have the love of the French military. He had a deep understanding of the European exploitation. He also had a deep understanding of the ruthlessness of the various European populations when they were taking out vengeance on the African population.
See, the difference between Toussaint and Dessalines, Toussaint wanted to make deals with the white supremacists. Toussaint felt he was a military man. He had some kind of camaraderie with the French. He felt that he could make deals. He was somewhat one of them. They would respect him as a military man. And that was his downfall. Now, Dessalines, he knew it. He's really the only modern African leader who understood that you cannot make deals with terrorists. You can't make deals with white supremacy. White supremacy is the ultimate form of terrorism. And Dessalines was the only person who was smart enough to realize that, and he got all the white supremacists off the island.
That's the story. So he was enslaved African. He was definitely beaten a lot. He ended up being bought by a free black man. So, those assimilated Negroes could do some good things if they want. His name was Jean-Baptiste Dessalines, the free black man who bought him and gave him his freedom. But Dessalines never forgot what slavery was about.
So what Dessalines did is, you buried alive 500 Africans, he hung 500 French. For everything that Rochambeau did, Dessalines did the same thing.
Add up all of those different characteristics, the topography, the geography, the guerrilla warfare, the use of arson, etc., you begin to understand how and why the Africans on the island were able to prevail.
At the end of the war, it was really bloody. And I think there was a point in time where Rochambeau killed thousands and he matched them, like head for head.
I mean, one of the raids I've learned about was a raid Dessalines undertook where they raided a French camp with just machetes. Now imagine you're a heavily armed French camp and a bunch of dudes walks into your camp with just machetes and chop you up. The level of bravery and arrogance almost that takes to go and face the French with just machetes.
The other piece to remember is you have St. Lucia, Tobago, and Martinique. Those are other three islands that the French are reinstating the enslavement process. And what the Haitian people are doing and Dessalines are doing is he's watching that and he's saying, look, it won't be long. If they can get those surrounding islands back where they were years ago, then they're going to come over here next. So Dessalines, he said straight out, he said, We are going to take care of these cannibals.
The British Army came here in 1801 with over 30,000 soldiers, and saying that it didn't want to waste too much time, wanted to do a rapid operation, and in less than a couple of weeks was going to take over the island. Well, he didn't know there was a man here called Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Toussaint Louverture was there too, but the main man on the ground was Dessalines. And sure enough, they had to leave on the ground. As they run back to their boats, they had to leave 25,000 troops on the ground. And that's the largest loss of the British Army in the entire America.
A lot of the Haitians came from places like Angola. When we think of Angola, we hear about capoeira. Capoeira is one of the fighting styles. Now, capoeira, people think that it's Brazilian. Capoeira is not Brazilian. As a matter of fact, the Portuguese banned capoeira from Brazil up until the 1930s because they didn't want those Africans using that, because the Africans were using that to free themselves in Brazil, beating the Portuguese. You had brothers like Zumbi, who was from Angola, and they were using the OG capoeira. The capoeira that we know now is watered down because it's based on an oral tradition, because they burned the books and the instruction manuals and got rid of those down in Brazil, because they knew that Africans getting a hold of that knowledge, that was very dangerous. So a lot of those African fighting skills, like capoeira, these are old African systems that we transfer to each other, and many of the Haitians, they tap back into those fighting skills. Stick fighting, capoeira, different types of African martial arts. And these were the skills they used to beat the French off them.
The Haitians had a certain resilience about them, where they applied science a lot of times. And science is very strong, so there's powders that are created, and these powders are not gunpowders, but if you spit it in someone's face, there's ways to numb them. And this is all science.
So our brothers and sisters in Haiti had an understanding of nature where they used nature. They knew how to use weather. They knew how to use the trees to cover themselves, to hide themselves. And when all the forces would come in, they would come down on just brute force. The martial arts that they brought from Africa, the fighting systems that they brought from Africa, the ability to make weapons out of wood and stick.
Once again, you have this small island of Black people with the population probably not exceeding 500,000 at its highest point. And it's surrounded by antagonists, not only in the Caribbean, but actually worldwide, in the sense, to the extent that European powers had their tentacles globally. And so this was not a time for revolutionary leader of Africans to be pussyfooting around, shall we say.
Being a military is not just about weapons. It's much more. You have to be spiritually, you have to be a military. You have to know how to treat people. You have to learn how to heal, because you're going to hurt, you're going to kill. You must do to heal so it will balance your soul. So there are a lot of things involved in the training of Dessalines, but you have to be clear. And Dessalines was very clear that slavery was no child's play. And slavers didn't care for us. They care more for a stone on the ground than any breathing people that look like us.
They spared no one who was fighting against them, as any soldier should do. And so the Africans proved to be extraordinarily good swordsmen. They were extraordinary with using lances, or what we call spears. And they learned very quickly how to be extraordinary using a rifle. And so we defeated the French straight up and hands down.
One of the really interesting things when you examine the French testimony is the frustration that the French particularly had with this tactic. They complain about it, they call it cowardice or whatever else, but then in other places, when the time was right, you hear French soldiers talking about a guy jumped down the cannon today, and these are the people we have to fight. The sheer terror of, like, we're fighting people who've decided now liberty or death. They've decided they are willing to die for their freedom. And this is one of the most fascinating questions about any revolution, but about the Haitian Revolution in particular. What makes people decide at this point we're now willing to die for an idea, but we weren't yesterday. And you see this behavior. You see people being burnt and tortured, laughing at it. You see people recklessly risking their life. Battle of Vertier, if you look at the French testimony of that final battle, the African behavior in that battle, we would say, was so militarily reckless, i.e. they were so willing to die for their freedom. The French stopped the battle in the middle to congratulate them and say, listen, we've never seen people die like this.
By the time Dessalines rises, circa 1803, circa 1804, the revolution is pretty far down the road, and he had learned the lessons that had ensnared Toussaint and was not about to be arrested and detained by supposed negotiators in good faith.
Not only were women very active, there are lots of children active in the fight. Children who made their names. And, you know, as looking out for, climbing on top of trees to look out for what's happening and alerting.
Most Africans who was fighting in Haiti were like first, at most second generation from Africa. So they still had the African martial arts skills as a part of their repertoire in terms of fighting.
And then, of course, there are other kinds of tactics. Arson was very successful. And of course, arson was very successfully used by the enslaved Africans in North America as well. That was one of the major tools in our toolkit right here in North America. And at a certain point, the European colonizers had to make a judgment as to whether or not it was worthwhile to continue to endure losses, that is to say, deaths, in trying to subdue these revolutionaries, when it's not clear that even if you did triumph, you would inherit a charred and burned landscape.
Bonaparte sends this huge armada, thinking we're going to get rid of these people, right? But they try to use ruse. That's the other thing. The Haitians really knew how to use ruse, right? They would do all kinds of things like keep changing their clothes and going around to make as if they had more people than they had, stuff like that. Or, you know, the Europeans loved, you know, sleeping with Black women or whatever. They never thought that these Black women would go back and tell the African warriors what was going on. They used everything that was in their hands.
Napoleon's campaign against the Haitians, it was a racial agenda. Napoleon specifically stated that he did not want a Black republic. We cannot have a Black republic. This thing was completely racial.
French writers, a lot of French writers were like, there must be some white person behind this. It's the abolitionists' fault. It's this person's fault. It's those guys who stirred up something else. There was this constant blaming of so-called white agitators.
Dessalines Toussaint, they didn't kill every white person on the island. That's a misconception. We were in war, and we were slaves. And within this slave, we had to fight for our independence. And in this process, you still had certain whites that were with the Haitians.
And so they create this model constitution, but they apply it to the circumstances of Haiti. So they say no plantations can exist. No white folks can own land. But they realize that all white folks are not the same. And so they have a special compensation for Polish white folks who joined their revolution and helped them to defeat the French.
At the end of the war, once the victory against France had happened, what Dessalines said to them, that because of the horrific genocide you've meted out against my people, you've got to go. You can't stay. He accepted their surrender. 7,000 of them surrendered and was pulled out of the country and went back home. The officers under Rochambeau and the others, who he got a ship for them, fully equipped the ship, and let them go home free. But his request was, all of you go home, okay? Can't stay here. The only people that can stay is the Italians and the Polish who fought with us, and the Germans who did not lift any arms against us.
After trying everything and couldn't get off the island, so then he had to come in front of Dessalines. And according to his own journal, he said, Dessalines was magnanimous. He complimented him. He said, "You're a good soldier. even if you've lost. They're supposed to give their sword to the winner. He says, no, keep your sword. You're a good soldier. I don't need your sword. I got my own. And so he's, what are you going to do to me? He says, nothing. I'm going to send you back to France. And your task will be to let them know never to set foot on this island again.
What's really significant about this, Aline, is that Rochambeau told everybody, I'm going to get that Negro. I'm going to do all kinds of heinous things to him. But when the Haitians won at Vertières on November 18th, 1803, he didn't kill Rochambeau. He let him go. And I think that's really significant.
And even those who got on the ship and went out with Rochambeau, you know what they did as soon as they got out at sea? They turned the cannons on Port-au-Prince and opened fire on the very people that had just given them their freedom. But as fate would have it, they run into some conflict with the British fleet a few days, 8 days out, and he ended up spending 2 years in a British prison or longer.
Dessalines obviously did kill a lot of white folks, especially the French, right? I think there was like 50,000 soldiers that came to re-enslave us, and 7,000 left alive.
And this is really interesting, the way that European imagery of Black people came back to haunt them. These big Black guys from Africa who've been laboring for you for decades and decades and decades, whose physical brute power and force you've depended on in terms of breeding them and all this. And now they got a machete in their hand. That brute force, that same imagery, sexualized graphic imagery you've created around the Black body has come back to haunt you because now it's aimed at you.
Modern historians, when they talk about Napoleon, they talk about how thorough he was as a general. They talk about his great military mind, the strategies he used. They just ooze and gush and praise Napoleon for being the greatest general. And the thing about Napoleon was defeated by Dessalines. So if your greatest general was defeated by Dessalines, that means Dessalines is the greatest general.
Marcus Mosiah Garvey spoke frequently on the Haitian Revolution and the lessons that we could learn from that. And the one lesson is, it ain't over till we win. The Irritated Genie, a book that I read, phenomenal book by Dr. Jacob Carruthers. It's called The Irritated Genie. That irritated genie is the spirit of revolution at all costs. Take no prisoners. We have no friends. It's up to us to make this happen. Then you have the Phantom of Liberty. The Phantom of Liberty is the philosophy that you believe that you can negotiate with your enemy, that you can integrate with your enemy, that your enemy wants to be your friend if you could just sit down and talk. And Dessalines was more of an irritated genie.
What's most fascinating about Dessalines, and probably the most under-discussed part of Dessalines' leadership, is that Dessalines attempted, long before the birth of Karl Marx, forms of proto-socialism, if you like, when he governed the island. So he attempted to nationalize all of the land that was formerly owned by the French, which was 75% of the arable land in the country, and spread it amongst the peasants. He was on record as saying, listen, we didn't win this war, i.e. we, the privileged leadership, we won the war. All of us, the peasant population, the enslaved population. And he tried to bring about some form of economic justice in the brief period that he governed. And in my view, and in lots of people's view, that was why he was killed by the other free people of color.
On January 1st, 1804, he declared Haiti independence. And the first sentence of our first constitution says, Haiti is independent from all powers of the universe.
Haiti liberated 5 South American nations, from Venezuela, Colombia, all the way down. We liberated also the entire island, right? The Dominican Republic didn't exist.
Not only did Haiti get their own freedom, and this is what was so dangerous to the white supremacists, Haiti helped other Latin American nations get rid of slavery. Like Ecuador, it stopped slavery in Ecuador. They helped them get rid of slavery. They helped Venezuela get rid of slavery. They helped the Dominican Republic get rid of slavery. So that was a big fear of all the other Western powers, that this nation of African warriors were stopping slavery all over the hemisphere. So this is why even today they have to subjugate Haiti.
When Yolanda came from Ecuador, he was trying to come out of slavery, and he had lots of problems. U.S. was giving him trouble. He came here. Dessalines welcomed him. He had people wounded with him. We healed them, gave them boat, money, weapons, and sent them back to continue their work. When he asked Dessalines, "But how will I repay you?" He says, "Every time you free people out of slavery, I am repaid."
The leading hero of Venezuela, Simón Bolívar, of course, received direct assistance from the Haitian revolutionaries. And of course, once again, this illustrates the debt we owe to Haiti, because part of the bargain was that the South American revolutionaries would move to abolish slavery. Sometimes that promise was kept, sometimes that promise was not kept, but that was the bargain that the Haitians tried to strike.
Years immediately after the revolution start to scare the white world, and they don't know what to do in Haiti, because they're like, if this infection spreads and it's proven that, you know, black people might actually be capable of government, what happens to all of the other former slave colonies in which blacks are the majority? What happens in Brazil? What happens in Jamaica and elsewhere? So it was a decision was made by most governments, like America, for example, not to recognize Haiti until they eventually abolished slavery themselves.
So 60 years, Haiti was not allowed to have a merchant marine to trade. And if you're a nation and you can't trade, you are impoverished.
During the aftermath of the Haitian Revolution after 1804, there was a lot of sabotage by the mulatto class, because the only thing that's worse than a white supremacist is a wannabe white supremacist. And the wannabe white supremacists are the worst, because they're fighting for something that they really can't be. So they'll sabotage anything for a fantasy. And that's what they did after the Haitian Revolution.
It's obvious that the Catholic Church and the French conspired to kill Dessalines with probably the help of the Americans and the British. And so Dessalines was assassinated. He went to meet someone. No one knew who this was. They cut his body up. I was told into 13 or 14 pieces and scattered around the island. But that's where the women come in. Again, his wife Felicite, Cecilia, and other women got together and gathered up all those pieces, put that body back together in the manner that it was done to Osiris in the myth in ancient Kemet, and they buried him.
Napoleon was so powerful that he intended to take over the 13 states. He sent 2 units, one to the Louisiana Territory and one to Haiti. His intention was to attack the United States and take over. But because he had to use the units he had put into Louisiana to Haiti, when Haiti became independent, remember that trade had stopped because of the Haitian Revolution.
Then Christophe took over the northern part of Haiti, while Pétion took over the southern part of Haiti. Pétion set up a sort of a republic. Christophe made himself king, or was elected king over the northern area. It is Christophe that built this extraordinary citadel, the largest such edifice in the Western Hemisphere. No one has done anything like this.
But if you look at the citadel in Haiti, or Sanssouci, or any of the other military governmental fortifications built in the time, and you imagine this as a society run and governed by people who were slaves into the middle of their adult life.
A citadel, a huge structure, the largest structure in the Americas, ready to house over 20,000 people. This is conceived by Dessalines and executed by Henry Christophe, who became king down the road. He built it in 11 years. No help from the World Bank, no FMI, no Friends of Haiti, nobody. Self-resources from A to Z.
It's this big castle that's built on one of the highest mountains in Haiti, armed forces, cannons that are aimed at the ocean. And the idea of this was, we're not sure if the French is coming back. So we have to make sure that we know the waters, we know how they're coming, we know where they're going to come from.
Haiti was making her own money. We made our own under Christophe. We made our own gold and silver coins. Better yet, we did it so well. Colombia, Venezuela, several other countries in South America asked us to make their money for. Yes, we were minting.
You know, you had a major rebellion down in Louisiana in 1811. That was shortly after thousands of enslaved Haitians had been brought to Louisiana, because many of the white Frenchmen who didn't go back to France, over 10,000 of them fled to New Orleans. And they took with them the enslaved Africans that they had control over. And many of those slave Africans then led what was the biggest rebellion in the history of the United States.
The white slave masters flee in Haiti, French ones. A lot of them go to French Louisiana, and they strengthen the slave regime in the South. They make slavery even more bedrock of Southern American culture. Remember, these are people who've seen what Black Revolution looks like in Haiti. And it was brutal. How are you going to get free of slavery without brutality? So they make the South of America a more concentratedly racist place.
Absolutely no one recognized Haiti's independence. That was number one. And though everybody was talking about freedom, liberty, democracy, everyone has the right to be happy. Oh, but not us.
I don't think they expected that the revolution would have had that kind of massive victory. And once it happened, the fear was, if we recognize, this was Thomas Jefferson who was in office at the time, if we recognize Haiti as a free republic, then what are we going to do about all the enslaved Africans in North America? So we have to reject it and now go into an economic boycott of it, similar to what they did to Cuba in modern times.
That's their stuff, right? They have this either or. Either I'm going to be it, I can't be it if you're it. See, African thought says everybody can be it. But the European mindset is that I can only be it if you are not it.
What happened to Haiti, though, was the tax that the French put on it, the reparation tax. So that's sort of like, so, okay, we'll give you independence, but now this is going to cost you, right? So we'll give it to you, but we'll pull your economic freedom from you.
And there are all kinds of economic exploitations that have been put onto Haiti since the pigs from America were put into Haiti to overtake their Haitian pig farming. Foreign grain was imported into Haiti. Sweatshops have been set up. I mean, there are reams and reams of books for people who are bothered that can go out and read on why Haiti is in the condition that it's in today. And it's largely due partly to a local parasitic, greedy elite, but mostly due to foreign exploitation. Without that foreign exploitation, the elite would not be in the position to be able to do the things that they have been and currently are still doing in Haiti.
So this also put a big fear in America's heart that Haiti had the ability right after that revolution to send troops to South America to help free those South American nations from Spain. Then they were worried about the African American nation here, especially when you had a large population of Africans in Florida that was still under the control of Spain. Florida was the biggest maroon community in the Western Hemisphere, but we don't refer to Florida as a maroon community because American history has falsely said that the people that were fighting were a group of Indians called Seminoles, and they'll tell you that that word they corrupt to be Seminoles come from the Spanish word of Cimarron, which means runaways. And so these are the runaway Africans. And so when Andrew Jackson was sent down there after he did the Mexican-American War to fight these people, he sent a letter back to Congress. And in the letter, he says, you sent me to fight Indians, but I've been fighting niggas from the day I got here. You know, and this is a letter that's still in the Library of Congress.
DuSable, this brother was the founder of Chicago, and he was a brother of Haitian descent. Brother spoke different languages, so he was the first person to understand the strategic location of Chicago and how that could be used. Because in Chicago, he could speak so many different languages. He could deal with the Spanish in the West. He could deal with the French in the South. He could deal with the English on the East. He could deal with the Native Americans in the North. So that was a very strategic place, and he was the first person to go there and monetize that area. And what's interesting about DuSable, many people thought that he was a spy for Haiti, because many people were shook about what happened during the Haitian Revolution, an African slave population rising up and overthrowing their oppressor. That sent chills all through white society.
The Haitian leadership in the 1820s had to make a decision. Should they go into debt and possibly deform the revolutionary process for decades to come by paying the government of Paris for the alleged losses suffered by slave owners? Or should they not make the payment and run the risk of being invaded and having all of the citizenry enslaved? Those were the stark choices faced by the leadership, and they chose the former, that is to say, to make this payment.
I think it's like 1825, Charles X sent the fleet to invade the islands and retake it. And the compromise was, you pay us 100 million francs, 150 million francs, which was reduced some years later to 90 million francs. And that's how that came about. And it said, you're paying us this for the land that you've taken from us, from the enslaved Africans who was working for us that you've taken from us, and the resources the land was producing for the French Republic. And so that's where that 150, which wasn't paid off until very recently, which kept the Haitian economy in a tither for the entire period of its history.
So we are a country that is being continually raped at every level, every time. If it's not an occupation, and anytime you see an occupation, you can be sure they do not occupy a country that has nothing.
I see a lot of similarities between Haiti and Detroit, because Detroit was the land of some of the most phenomenal movements of Black people ever in the world. Marcus Garvey had a strong movement in Detroit. The Honorable Noble Drew Ali developed the strongest contingent and temple in Detroit. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a student of Marcus Garvey and Noble Drew Ali in Detroit. Malcolm X moved to Detroit to be close to Elijah Muhammad. And then, of course, you have the Motown sound. You have the voice of Black people worldwide. And I think that what's happening in Detroit is very much like that. At all costs, Detroit must be purged of its power.
The Marines came in and they were responsible for the death of close to 4,000 to 5,000 Haitian citizens. And the occupation lasted something like 20 years. And when they came in, what they did was seize control of all of the finances, all of the banks, and all the wealth of Haiti. And the money, Haiti's monies from its bank and its wealth was brought to America and transferred down to banks in New York. That wealth had never been returned to Haiti.
The first time the citadel is attacked is during the U.S. occupation of Haiti in 1915. The U.S. Army stood up every day for 90 days and shoot at it while there's nobody in it.
But even then, America was fully now vested and in control of the Haitian economy. And during that occupation of the American Marines, they rewrote the Haitian Constitution. Until then, part of Dessalines' Constitution was that no land could be sold or owned by any foreign persons. Land could only be owned by Haitians of blood. Even a Haitian who had left home could no longer own land. And so what America did was change the Constitution so that Americans could buy land, and they began to buy up or seize some of the best farmland and mining lands in Haiti. And that's still true to today.
The mountains that Christopher Columbus didn't have the technology to take the gold out of, they've got the technology to do now, and they are taking that out. They say we have 20 billion in gold.
And now Haiti is important because of its geographical location and its geology. There's oil and gas in abundance off of Haiti's shore. And so one of the reasons for the Clinton Foundations and these others to saturate Haiti is there's gold in them, there are hills, and there is oil off of those shores and beaches. And so Haiti is now under a new form of exploitation, which we are calling globalism.
The Clintons were put over, and their people who worked with and for their foundation, was put over managing the billions of dollars that came into Haiti for the rebuilding process. Well, they managed it back into their foundations and their bank accounts.
For the last 13 years in Haiti, the UN has been the cover for the Bushes and the Clintons to work together and extract the resources that we have. Haiti has $120 billion worth of oil.
The International Red Cross claims that they have received from people around the world $6 billion for the quake situation in 2010. Haiti never saw. We did not see 6 billion, we did not see 5 billion, we did not see 4 billion, we did not see 3, 2, or 1 billion. But somebody got the money.
The money is still controlled by the European. The education is still controlled. The institutional political structure is still controlled. And the spiritual structure is still controlled. That you have Africans in the French-speaking areas today who are readily prepared to say, "Je suis français," I'm French. And so that cultural dynamic of assimilation into French culture has helped cripple Africans.
Haiti is corrupted because 80% of a population, man, is living on less than $1 a day. It's corrupted because the lack of education. This is why this place is corrupted.
If you go to almost any store downtown and you get buy yourself a new suit, look inside and see where it was made. That suit was made in Haiti. Probably for you're paying maybe $200. It was probably made for $25. The guy who made the suit may have made $1. Okay, and so and part of that arrangement and contract that made, you can't unionize, you can't strike, and you can't ask for an increase in wage. Any of those can result in you losing your job or even going to jail.
Different times in our history, you will find that Haiti is forward in everything. In creating the OAU, the Haitians were the #1 people in doing all the papers and working, and when everything, the US was not in it. They refused to be part of it. And when we were a couple of weeks away from the grand opening, US stepped in with money, bought itself in, and demanded that Haiti be not part of it.
Because Wycliffe had put together a foundation that was being contributed to, and that money could not be controlled by them. That was one of the reasons. And the other reasons, they had already picked someone they wanted to put in the presidency that they could control. And they could not control the Wycliffe John.
If I was a politician, I would have been the president of Haiti. But the fact that I didn't go through the proper lobbying, the proper, you got to do a deal with this person, you got to make sure you get the blessing from this person, from that person. None of that happened. So it was almost like Wyclef Jean was a wild card. And a wild card is not accepted.
Which is very interesting because you have so many nonprofit organizations that rape Haiti that are white-run organizations, and they never talk about that corruption, but all of a sudden it's Wyclef and Yele, they're the most corrupt thing ever.
The intimidation factor of whatever anyone was trying, it did not work, you know? And if I'm sitting here and I was to tell you that, you know, I wasn't armed up, I would be lying to you, because at the end of the day, I was in a position where I was ready to do whatever I had to do as a Haitian citizen to make sure that the power went to the right person that wasn't going to oppress the people.
There's a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and the author talks about how the white supremacist Western powers will put black leaders, puppet leaders, into certain positions to do the bidding of Western powers. And when these African leaders stop doing the bidding for Western powers, they're usually assassinated. It's a white guy who wrote this book. And our brother Wyclef, big music star, the media loved him. The minute Wyclef wanted to run for president of Haiti, he's a man of the people, not corrupt, doesn't need the money. I mean, he's a very successful artist already, but he wants to do something for his people because he's from those people. The minute he wanted to run for president of Haiti, all of a sudden the media turned on Wyclef. They started putting negative stories out about our brother. They started talking about his Yele Foundation, talking about corruption.
Like Yele Haiti was a patsy. and a distraction for a lot of what really went down in Haiti. While everyone was trying to make Yele Haiti look like there was this big organization, you know, with the big celebrity face, like, you know, because when you hear the Red Cross, there's no face that go with it. All you see is Red Cross. You know what I mean? Like, so when you hear Wyclef, you be, yo, that's the Yele Haiti, that's the face.
And the minute Wyclef got back into the music game and just focused on music, everything was good again. So the whole Wyclef slander thing was to show him, don't step out of your place. And I don't believe any of the negative stories that they said about Wyclef. It was all propaganda, and it was propaganda for a reason. And we have to stop believing the white supremacists when they're trying to give us negative information on people within our communities.
Yele Haiti was a patsy for a bigger play, because now that you rarely hear anyone say anything about Yele. The minute Clef goes back and starts to play guitar, does his music, and hits the billboard again, it's almost like, okay, nigga, you back in your place. This is what you're supposed to be doing, nigga. Don't forget, you're supposed to be singing. You're supposed to be making people dance. And when it comes to this thing in politics, we're trying to be careful how you gonna move, right? But what don't kill you, right? It don't make you stronger.
Jamaica's right next to Haiti. There were a lot of rebel leaders from Jamaica, like Bookman. He was a rebel leader in Haiti who was from Jamaica. So that spirit of revolution has always been interchangeable between the Haitians and the Jamaicans. So Garvey was definitely influenced by the Haitian Revolution and Dessalines. When you look at pictures of Marcus Garvey, many people will suggest that he's dressed like Dessalines. And Marcus Garvey has influenced so many movements that are modern now. He influenced the Nation of Islam. He influenced the Moorish Science Temple. He influenced Malcolm X. Malcolm X's father was a Garveyite. Ho Chi Minh, the leader of Vietnam, was a Garveyite. He studied at the feet of Marcus Garvey when Ho Chi Minh was in Harlem. And this is why Vietnam was able to use that spirit of revolution to fight off the European powers and remain independent on their own. They got that spirit through Garvey, who got that spirit through Dessalines, who got that spirit through the Haitian Revolution.
When you're in the vanguard, that means oftentimes you're the first to get the arrows in your chest. You're the first to be wounded and the first to bleed profusely. And that's the case for the Haitian revolutionary process. That is to say that they, in some ways, were sacrificial lambs for the rest of us. That is to say, by going up against the slave owners and inflicting this deadly blow on the slave system, they helped to liberate the rest of us. But in turn, they helped to injure themselves.
Whatever our ancestors did is only the best for them. What they expect from us is to add our victories to their victories and to keep going up higher and higher.
You cannot rebuild your society until you rebuild yourself. And you cannot rebuild yourself until you restore your spiritual, cultural, and historical integrity to the mindset that is about to carry out this building.
The month of August is very instrumental to melanated people. There's something about the month of August that electrifies our melanin, that gives us a certain sense of power. If you look at a lot of significant revolutions, they all happen in August. The Haitian Revolution happened in August. Jamaica got its independence in August. Look at modern times. The Watts riots was in August. Let's get even more modern. The Ferguson uprising was in August. I think Garvey's birthday is in August. So there's a lot of significant things that happen in the month of August as it relates to melanated people. And the Haitian Revolution was one of those things.
So we Haitians need a new movement. This movement is, how do you get Haitians in Haiti into economic freedom? How do you get them into education?
Why do you think the slavers go through so much effort for you not to know your history? Evidently, because that's where all your references are. That's what gives you the measure as to what you can do.
But every place we see success in the African world, it was when Africans stood up and said, I'm going to be free in Africa. And so we did learn from Haiti. What were those moments when we were struggling to be free in Africa?
Many of the Western powers are still trying to sabotage Haiti to this very day. Recently, the UN had to apologize for putting cholera in the water over there. People are sending plastic rice over there to the people. They're sending plastic chicken. They're sabotaging the economy. And the fact that they have to make such a collaborative effort to sabotage the small island of African people, that just shows the innate power that the Haitians have.
The French Revolution was incredibly brutal, yet it's treated with respect in historiography as producing ideas that were influential for humanity. The Chinese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, similar, all treated with respect. The Haitian Revolution, until very recently, I would argue the tide is changing, has been treated like some niggas in the Caribbean rebellion, when actually it's arguably the greatest challenge to the dominant global order, as I can't remember which scholar said that, in the entire last 200 years.
It's about capturing the light from what happened in the past, because that is the light that allows you to understand the present. And it is the same light that will show you the fastest and best way to a better tomorrow.
And if there is a nation that will rise through their character, it's going to be Haiti. These are people who are experiencing something that they should not have to go through, but they're experiencing it. They're doing it with dignity and respect, and they're doing it showing us all over the world how people, in no matter what condition you're in, it ain't over till you win.
So the importance that what is good for the collective is the priority. It's not the individual. Individuals can come and go, but we must worry that either on the way we come or the way we go, we don't damage the collective.
During the revolution, enough people understood that rugged individualism, that one or two people getting little Negro trinkets from the white supremacists, it's just not worth sabotaging the collective efforts of the entire population. And they were smart enough to understand that. And I wish we are smart enough to understand that now.
So I think visiting Haiti, going and seeing our brothers and sisters on the ground, interacting there with community, all of these things are things that the global African diaspora and anyone interested in justice could and should be doing in terms of resurrecting an island that made an incomparable contribution to the modern world.
When we look at coverage of Haiti today, the Western media will try to scare us, Black people, from going to Haiti. We're always told, don't go to Haiti. It's dangerous. When you get off the plane, you're going to get kidnapped. There's going to be a voodoo ceremony. Something's going to happen to you. So Black people are scared of going to Haiti to visit for the most part. When I go over there, there's white people all on the plane going over there. People going over there vacationing, because there's a lot of nice parts over there in Haiti. So we have to stop listening to the media telling us what to do and what not to do about Haiti. I didn't feel unsafe over there. The people were beautiful. The people were wonderful. Nobody's trying to bother anybody. These people are trying to survive. And I'm very inspired by the Haitian people.
We need to mobilize our forces as best we can to link up with Haiti. And one of the things that we could do to contribute to that is to encourage Haitians out of Haiti to Africanize.
When I look at Haiti, I look at a people with a spirit, with a power, with a spiritual system that will never disable them. The God that they pray to will always look out for them. And sometimes you got to go through that to get where you need to get.
I think that with this current Trump administration, this spells ill for the future of Black people in the immediate sense in North America. And that as we try to help the Haitians, we should realize that we're also helping ourselves, because we, Black Americans, need a global approach to our problems.
And to reach out to community-based organizations of Haitian descent that are assisting their people in any way that they possibly can. They can get it directly to the people and begin to develop those types of relationships.
The fortunate aspect of this Trump administration is that he is creating antagonists all over the world, not least south of the border of Mexico. I continue to be baffled and befuddled by the fact that Black Americans have not been sending delegations and pilgrimages to Mexico City to forge alliances there, which in turn could be leveraged on behalf of our brothers and sisters in Haiti. I don't think it takes an oracle or a genius to figure out what needs to be done. I just think it requires courage.
My experiences with people from Haiti or Haiti, whether they are here or whether they are in Haiti, is that there is a resilience. There's a great dignity and a great pride in them. And I remember I've spoken to them before, and their power, their internal power, the power from within, their ability to commune, that idea of staying together and sticking together and looking out for each other is very powerful. And I think that people, they're misunderstanding them if they don't think that Haiti can rise.
Good evening. Welcome to the New York Society Library. I'm Carolyn Waters, the head librarian. And before we begin, I'd like to ask that you please silence any cell phones or any other devices that might disrupt the presentation. Thank you. As you may have noticed, we are filming tonight. C-SPAN is here to film the lecture. So just please be aware that if you do ask a question, you will be filmed. And we also ask that you please wait till the microphone comes to you before asking your question. The library is able to offer events like the one you'll hear tonight, as well as maintain our book collections, our electronic resources and ebooks, and maintain our expanded hours due to the generous support of our members and friends. We've just kicked off our annual appeal, so if you have already sent in a donation, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you have not, there's still time. Now it's my pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker, Shane White. Dr. White comes to us all the way from Australia, where he is the Challis Professor of History at the University of Sydney. Although he lives on the other side of the world, Dr. White's main research interests are African American history and the history of New York City. He's the author of 5 books, including Playing the Numbers, Gambling in Harlem Between the Wars, The Sounds of Slavery, Discovering African American History Through Songs, Sermons, and Speech, and Stories of Freedom in Black New York. His most recent book is the remarkable story of Jeremiah G. Hamilton, Wall Street's first Black millionaire. Library Journal wrote, "Hamilton's story is gripping. So too is his puzzling near disappearance from the historical record. White does an excellent job drawing out the facts of Hamilton's life and supplementing them with details from the history of Wall Street and of other African-American New Yorkers of the era. We are proud to add that Jeremiah G. Hamilton was actually a shareholder of the New York Society Library. He received his share in 1856 when the library was down at University Place. So please join me in welcoming Shane White to the podium.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all turning up. As far as I'm concerned, I speak in perfect accentless English, and you lot speak really strange, but that's probably a minority opinion here. I'll do what most Americans do when they're in England or Australia and just ignore that fact and speak really quickly and give you a bit of a challenge. Who was Jeremiah G. Hamilton? He first turns up in New York City in 1828 as a 20-year-old, running a cargo of counterfeit coin for a consortium of New York merchants down to Haiti, the Black Republic. They get caught down there, and Jeremiah Hamilton escapes. He's hidden by black fishermen around Port-au-Prince Harbour for a few days before he can get back on a New York-bound brig and get back to New York. And there was a considerable kerfuffle in the newspapers back in New York about this, because it was seen as undermining America's trade, because the North is trying to trade with Haiti. Freedom's Journal, the first black newspaper, hated Jeremiah Hamilton because he was undermining that black republic. He then probably moves to New York in the early 1830s, probably 1833, I think, and he struggles for a while trying to make ends meet, trying to get ahead. He's like everyone else in the dynamically growing metropolis of New York City at the time. He eventually does establish himself and get ahead. And he does it through, he has a close link with the insurance companies, the marine insurance companies. In fact, the marine insurance companies begin to found their own associations and talk to one another, in part because of Jeremiah Hamilton. What he specialised in was over-insuring boats and then sending them to the bottom of the ocean and then claiming insurance on them. By 1836, all the marine insurance companies in New York City had come to an arrangement amongst themselves that no cargo or ship that had any link whatsoever to Jeremiah Hamilton would be insured by them. He still manages to get around that in quite complicated and very, very, very clever ways. By about 1835, 1836, he's established himself in New York City, and he does what every other tyro businessman does in New York City in 1836. In 1836, New York City and America actually is undergoing a real estate frenzy. Prices are just they're skyrocketing everywhere. And for really the only time in his business career, Hamilton follows the herd and jumps in, and he buys real estate. He buys 47 lots of land over in Astoria, but he also buys up in Poughkeepsie. He buys several acres of land in Poughkeepsie, the township. He buys the Mansion House, which is perhaps the flashiest house in Poughkeepsie. He buys a 400-foot-long wharf with 3 buildings on it. So he's actually going long on real estate, and he buys about 3 or 4 weeks short of the top of the real estate market, and it's going to go bust. And he had borrowed money. Like falling real estate prices and mortgages are an unholy combination, as we've seen repeatedly actually since then. What actually happened then is that Hamilton, for the next 5 years, is fending off creditors who are after him. He is one of thousands of New Yorkers who are on the verge of bankruptcy. He actually takes advantage of the new federal legislation that comes through in 1842, and it's a new bankruptcy law which is rather more forgiving of the bankrupted and is not so good for the creditors. I think it was the 3rd day that the new law operates, Hamilton went in and declared himself bankrupt. The thing about Hamilton, he's black. He's a pioneer. He's the only black man doing this sort of stuff down in Wall Street. And if you think about the first black baseball player in the major leagues, the first black whatever, usually they have to appear in the most deferential fashion, and they're sort of feeling their way because there's no one really to tell them how things operate. The thing that's really interesting about Hamilton is that he knows his way around. And he knows his way around Wall Street in the most interesting fashion. So he declares himself bankrupt, but then his assets are sold, and he knows that they're sold. So his real estate that he had paid something like $35,000 for in 1836, and it's worth a lot less than that in 1842, he goes along to the bankrupt sale and he buys it back for $20. And again, this is an insider. There are a whole bunch of people who are buying up bankrupt stock because there's, day after day of bankrupt people, all their chattels and holdings are being sold. And there are people organized amongst themselves to buy it. He goes in, clearly talks to these people, makes sure no one drives the price up, and buys it back, as I said, for $20. He then hits the stock exchange in a big way. Now, he's been buying and selling shares in the 1830s, but his second fortune is on the back of working in the stock exchange, of buying and selling shares. And again, if you're a black man buying and selling shares, dealing with basically a lily white world, you have to be sharper and quicker than everyone else. And he was, if you hit Hamilton, he hit you back and added 10% for interest. He is not a backward stepping individual. In 1845, the second board of the stock exchange here passes a resolution that anyone who buys or sells shares from Jeremiah Hamilton will be expelled from the stock exchange. And again, the two institutions, the insurance company and the stock exchange, both put, to coin a phrase, a black ban on Jeremiah Hamilton. It can hardly be coincidence that he is black. So there's discrimination. It's not a level playing field. On the other hand, for the most part, the white businessmen are more interested in the colour of his money than the colour of his skin. He is innovative as well in the way he deals on the stock exchange. So he forms what is called a pool, which is very similar, a very simple, similar version of a hedge fund, in which people put in money and then he is in charge of that money and uses it as leverage to borrow more money and then takes an aggressive position in the market. So what you have is prominent white New Yorkers trusting the judgment of a black man as to what stocks, mostly railroad and steamship companies, stocks to buy and sell. One of his customers was, who actually ends up suing him, was actually the librarian at the New York Society Library for 50 years, who ended up, he had $1,000, which he invests with Hamilton. And here's the reason why, or an explanation of why hedge funds only deal with multimillionaires rather than small fry, because he kept on changing his mind. He's the sort of person, he's not a professional investor. He drives people nuts. And there was a long court case out of this. The other thing that Hamilton did was he would buy shares in a company, then sue the company and try to bring in a receiver to have all the assets of the company sold and redistributed to the shareholders themselves. So he does this with the Poughkeepsie Silk Company, and he does it with the Accessory Transit Company, which gets him into a pitched battle with Cornelius Vanderbilt. And when Cornelius Vanderbilt dies, there's a really interesting obituary which said that Cornelius Vanderbilt feared no one, but when it came to a stock market battle, there was one person he respected, and it was Jeremiah Hamilton. It doesn't mention that he's black, but he was. So in the 1840s and the 50s, Jeremiah Hamilton is a prominent man about town. He is the first black millionaire. He's acknowledged to be a millionaire in a black newspaper in 1851 or 52. One of my favorite images of Hamilton is that for a couple of years in the late 1840s, he leaves New York. He's got problems. He has problems living. He's a master of the universe in his day job, But when he walks on the streets, he's not even a second-class citizen, and violence is apt to erupt. So a couple of times when he's buying Poughkeepsie real estate, I think he's thinking about shifting to Poughkeepsie. Earlier than that, he lives up near Bloomingdale, up near Columbia University nowadays, outside of the city. But in the late 1840s, he buys an estate in New Jersey, which is 30 miles from Manhattan. And the image of a black man on a 270-acre estate with a house with 10 bedrooms and a ballroom on his terraces, looking out down the hill to where he has 2 trout streams, a fish pond, and quail and grouse hunting, does not accord with the usual way African Americans are seen in the antebellum North, and it's an image I sort of treasure. It's in this time as well that he buys his share in the New York Society Library in 1856, and again, in the book, I look at the book. Over the next 20 years, he borrows over 250 books from the New York Society Library. This must be the first extensive reading list of an African American ever, basically, in this country. And I also have got, when he went bankrupt, there was an inventory of his own library, and it accords with the books he's borrowing. So in the book, I've got several pages actually looking at the sort of stuff he was borrowing from this place. In the draft riots in 1863, perhaps New York's worst ever week of in his existence, I suppose, a mob. He's living on East 29th Street. A mob comes into the street, an Irish mob, chanting 68, 68, 68, which was the number of his house, and come to his house, kick the basement door in and race up the stairs, confronted by his wife. He married a white woman, and often you think of black men and white women, you think of it being a transient relationship of some sort. They were married 40 years, had 10 children. In 1837, when he was 30, he met her and she was 14, and he got her. She was pregnant when she was 14. Anyway, in 1863, she stands at the top of the stairs and says, what do you want? What can I do for you? And they said, we want your husband. We're going to hang him from the lamppost out the front of the house. But he's not an idiot. He hightailed it over the back fence and had disappeared while she was left holding the fort. He dies in 1875. He also, he travels. He probably went to San Francisco. He travels to Paris, and he's in Paris a couple of days before the siege starts, when the Prussian army is coming down in 1870. He's one of those people who turn up in all manner of interesting places. So with the fact the New York Sun newspaper is one of the most famous newspapers, the founder of the New York Sun, Benjamin Day, was his best friend, and he publishes articles in the New York Sun. Jeremiah Hamilton does. Anyway, he eventually dies in 1875. What's his importance? Why should anyone care? The interesting thing about this guy is, I hope I've conveyed that he's a prominent individual of sorts, and deserving of some sort of recognition, but he's been absolutely, totally and utterly erased from American history. He's mentioned in print 4 times since 1900, and 3 of those 4 times are wrong. One of them, a historian thought that he was white and went to the West Indies and got a suntan, which fooled the neighbours into thinking he was black. So he's been totally erased. In part, he's too idiosyncratic a figure to figure in Wall Street's history, so they forget him. And he had nothing whatsoever to do with the other African Americans in New York City. He disdained them, they disdained him. He was never going to be remembered as part of the heroic African American struggle in New York City. So he sort of falls between the cracks and gets totally ignored. As well as what I'm interested in is what he tells us about African Americans and actually New York City in the 19th century. And that's really a large part of what the book is about. Trying to look at race relations anew by looking at this person who was associating with the whites but was not white and was being treated like a black man but had nothing whatsoever to do with the black man. So in the 1830s and 1840s, New York City is inventing segregation. It's going to be exported to the South later on. So what was it like for this black man to walk the streets of New York? And that's the sort of question I try to get at in the book. All right, I'm actually going to read or flick my prose upon you for a couple of paragraphs in which I try and make that very same point. Jeremiah Hamilton's unique position in New York presents any writer with an opportunity for coming to a new understanding of the way the 19th century city worked. He offers a way to reconsider subjects that are seen without too much thought as being quintessentially white, totally segregated from the African American past. Most obviously, this is the case with Wall Street, the stock exchange, and the Great Fire. But it is also true of the penny press revolution of the 1830s and many other topics. Far too often, historians treat African Americans as if white segregationists had succeeded, as if blacks lived in their own separate world, physically and culturally removed from everyone else. In effect, African Americans become segregated for a second time in the telling of their history, easily marginalized from the main American story, relegated to the footnotes. Hamilton trampled all over such black and white distinctions, and anyone telling his story today must be similarly disdainful of racial shibboleths. In the end, though, it is Hamilton who stands alone in the limelight. His was a dramatic life, cinematic in its vividness. It included incidents of daring do, a trial that was the talk of the town, and more than the occasional angry confrontation over business ethics, or his lack of them. In all this, Hamilton never took one backward step. He was not a forgiving man. If you crossed him, he returned the favour and always added a few % for interest. It was one thing for Cornelius Vanderbilt or any other white man to be this aggressive, rather another for the so-called Prince of Darkness to behave in such a fashion. He often rubbed people up the wrong way, though he never seemed to care too much. Hamilton could also be charming, as silkily smooth as any other hustler trying his luck on Wall Street. A wise person did not trust him very far at all. He had learned in a hard school that books should be balanced, accounts for the most part settled, and the law treated as simply something to be taken advantage of or got around. This African American was at home in courtroom or east of the waterfront, New York Society Library or Delmonico's. He could tell you which railroad stocks were a good buy, converse about Francis Bacon's philosophical treatises or Henry Fielding's The History of Tom Jones, a foundling, stitch up a deal to sell a refitted steamboat to Cuba, dash off an article for the New York Sun, and arrange to scuttle an overinsured ship. Most remarkable of all, he was a black man who became rich while living out the American nightmare of race. The Prince of Darkness was an extraordinary figure, and I have lived with him now for too many years. My telling of the untold story of Jeremiah G. Hamilton, Wall Street's first black millionaire, begins in 1828, the year in which he first got under the skin of a New York businessman. So I find him an absolute fascinating character. And you'll be surprised to know that, unlike most historians, I think someone should make a film about Jeremiah Hamilton. A couple of months ago, there was an article in the New Yorker about Chris Rock, and towards the end of it, it said that he had been trying to make a film about Nat Turner. Now, as any of you who know the history of Nat Turner and what has happened to Nat Turner, that film is never going to be made. There's too much baggage with William Styron's novel and the 10 black writers responding to it. Well, I think Chris Rock, other people should think about making a film about someone like Jeremiah Hamilton, because he's often, films about African Americans tend to be either saints or sinners, Martin Luther King or Tupac. And he is someone who was a sinner, but no more than Mellon or Vanderbilt. He bent the law and was just as ruthless as they were. Plus, unlike Nat Turner, it's not a knife or an axe that he uses. It's actually legal documents and reading the fine print that enables this person to get ahead. So in a way, he's a new type of sinner. So I hope that someday someone makes a film of him, just so that Jeremiah Hamilton can actually have the moment in time that I think he deserves. Thank you very much. So I think this is where we have, anyone's got any questions?
Sorry, madam, I'm over here. I'll get to you in just a second.
My number one. Where did he come from? I mean, this is obviously a free black man coming to, well, New York was a copperhead city with very close relations with the South. Where did he get his education? Why did he come there?
There are two stories about where he comes from. And in the book, I balance both of them. One is he comes from the Caribbean. His death certificate says his father and mother came from Port-au-Prince. So Haiti, Cuba, the two become pretty much intermixed because of the Haitian Revolution and the migrants and currents of the time. The other story says he comes from Richmond, Virginia. And as I was writing the book, depending on what part I was researching or writing, I would bounce backwards and forwards between the two. In the end, I think that probably he came from the Caribbean, but I think he may have stopped in Richmond on the way. That's having your cake and eating it. Did you ask about his education as well? He had, according to one of his obituaries, he had a very good education, a school education where he came from. That particular obituary thought he came from Puerto Rico. So he had a solid school education, and I think it was a sort of education that must have been moderately inspiring, something rather more than rote learning, because he reads throughout his life. And in early 1840s, when he goes bankrupt, he has 22 volumes in his library that are inventoried amongst the bankrupt stuff. 10 copies of the Edinburgh Review, a couple of volumes of Bolingbroke's writings, several volumes of Bacon's writings, an encyclopedia type of thing. And then when he is a member here, he also is reading Hobbes, more Bacon, more Bolingbroke, and he does read a few novels as well. So from 1856 onwards, he borrowed, I don't know, he actually physically read the books he borrowed from here, but you tend to think someone who comes and borrows 250 books is probably reading them. It's not for show on the coffee table type of thing. So I think there's a certain element of the autodidact to him. So he certainly didn't go to university or anything like that.
Did he die rich?
When he died, there is about, I must have collected about 100 little notices in newspapers from California to Maine that all had the same thing, that he was the richest colored man in America, and he was worth $2 million. And like he may well have been, but the money doesn't last. It seems to have supported many of his children who didn't, but most of them didn't marry or have kids, and they seem to have done not that much, and they were living off. So he owned the house on East 29th Street. He owned 3 houses on Greenwich Street, just on the edge of where the World Trade Center precinct is now. He probably had cash on hand and shares, but they weren't listed in the will when he dies and stuff. So anyway, yes, he was Wall Street's first black millionaire. He was one of the very early Americans to have the term millionaire, which is a sort of invention of the 19th century. It becomes an American word rather than a British word, though Lord Byron is one of the very earliest to use it. So Astor, John Jacob Astor, is really the first really big millionaire, and in the 1830s the term is becoming more common. He's first called a black millionaire in 1851 or 52 when James McCune Smith calls him that in the Frederick Douglass newspaper. So he's actually one of the earliest Americans to be called a millionaire.
Did you determine the racial makeup of his servants in either his New Jersey house or his New York house from the census?
No, he has, in his will, he leaves money to Irish girls who were servants in his house for 20 or 30 years. In the census where he is in New Jersey, there seem to have been landless labourers living very close to the estate, and I think that they were probably working on the estate for him. The actual household just lists 2 Irish girls as servants.
And was he referred to in insulting terms by newspapers? You know, the Negro millionaire or something like that? Or
he's called, well, the Prince of Darkness is not really an endearing term. He's also called Nigger Hamilton. And people like Benjamin Day, even people who trash him, like James Gordon Bennett is one of the great American racists. He's an absolute fascinating, brilliant, difficult man. But even he has to admit that there's something there to this guy. Benjamin Day, as I said before, is his best friend, and Day writes more positively about him. It's the trouble about getting old, you lose names. The next editor of the Sun newspaper, who was Benjamin Day's brother-in-law, attacked him. But then that leads to and that was in part because Moses, does someone know someone? Moses, sorry?
Moses Tower, the first millionaire in New York?
No, Moses, the editor of the second proprietor of the Sun newspaper. They end up having, Benjamin Day is his brother-in-law, and he sells the newspaper to his brother-in-law. Day later on says it was the stupidest thing he ever did in his life. And the two fall out. And then they have a big libel trial. And it hinges on Jeremiah Hamilton, because the second editor of the Sun newspaper warns Benjamin Day not to hang around with this disreputable black man. So Benjamin Day is forced to sue for libel. So it hinges on the character of Jeremiah Hamilton and also whether he is a Negro or not. So there's a trial down on Center Street in the Tombs that is the talk of the town. Everyone turns up, and it hinges on, as I said, whether he's a black or not. And various witnesses get into the box and say, he is disreputable. I know he's a black because I have seen him with his wig off. He wears a wig for 40 years. And that proves he's black. because he's got the shaved head underneath. And then after one of these, a justice has got out of the witness box, Hamilton can take it no longer, and he just stands up and he says, yells into the courtroom, the only reason he testified against me was he came into Wall Street to borrow money from me and I wouldn't let him lend him money. And there's a kerfuffle, and the judge gavels and dismisses for the day at 7 o'clock at night. And as that justice who testified and Jeremiah Hamilton walk out of the court, they start yelling at one another and jostling. They get to the steps of the tombs, and the justice hits Hamilton with a cane. Hamilton, here comes the adding 10%, grabs a whole lump of wood and swings at the justice's head, and they end up with an all-in brawl in the street. And Benjamin Day, Jeremiah Hamilton, and Jeremiah Hamilton's brother-in-law all end up getting arrested. It was I've been reading New York newspapers and New York court cases for 35 years, and I had never seen anything like that occurring in a courtroom. And the whole thing hinged on this testimony as to whether he was black or not, and also as to his character.
Does that mean he's very light skinned?
I found only one reference to his color of his skin, and he was described as a dark mulatto. So where that puts someone on the color spectrum, I have no idea. Well, I suppose it depends on whether you're defining stuff on skin color or blood or what the hell you're using. But yes, I always find Americans on race interesting.
Did you find, obviously you found sources for your book.
Did
he keep any notes himself?
I would kill to have had. One of the interesting things about writing this book, if you go to a biography section over in Barnes & Noble, you go to the biography section, 99.99% of books there is already a book on the character, whether it's an autobiography or what have you. In this case, there was absolutely nothing. When you reach page 2 of this book, you have already got the most facts about Hamilton accumulated on a printed page anywhere ever. So no, the book is based on, I found something like 65 court cases. So he's a serial litigant. And I also found newspaper stuff. And that means I have to craft a book out of, without getting, I can't, someone's writing about Virginia Woolf, they know every passing thought that goes through her head, through her diaries and what have you, or through her novels. I can't do that, which makes the actual writing of the book very, very difficult. Perhaps too difficult for some of the Amazon readers who have found it very dry and written like a textbook. I don't know if Amazon readers realise how wounding to the author, the only person who ever reads their comments, such comments are. But it's actually very difficult to write and hold your reader's interest for 300 whatever pages when I have got a couple of words from him in court cases and sort of when he's sort of testifying here and there, but I've got nothing. He doesn't sit down and write, oh, it's terrible, white New Yorkers treat me so horribly when I'm on the train coming uptown, which is unfortunate. I would love to have had 10 minutes sit down with him to ask him a few questions.
Well, we had to drag the wig out of you, man. You weren't even going to mention that, were you?
No, I've forgotten about it. When he arrives here in by 1835, he shaved his head and he has a long black flowing wig, which was commented on repeatedly by people, so that when the name of that newspaper editor, who I can't remember, who succeeded Dave the Sun, calls him a counterfeit. He's talking about a number of things, but one of the things he's talking about is the wig. And the wig is associated, and the hair is seen as being more important than skin color, actually, in trying to work out whether someone is black or not. So when he dies in 1875, all the obituaries talk about a high, squeaky voice and a long, flowing black wig, and that's about. And there are no pictures of him. So if you actually look him up on the internet, you'll see a few people have sort of piggybacked on me, and like I had a piece in the New York Times. And there was a Wikipedia entry on Jeremiah Hamilton about 2 hours after the New York Times piece appeared. There are various pieces like that, and there are pictures attached to it. They are pictures of actually Jeremiah J. Hamilton, who was a black legislator from Texas at the end of the 19th century. There is no image of Hamilton that I managed to find in all my pursuits.
Just as a point of reference, I'm a white mulatto. You didn't say how he died?
Of pneumonia. So he always went upriver to the Saratoga for summer for the last 10 years of his life. And they were packing up to go, and he got sick, went to bed, and 2 days later he was dead. And pneumonia was the story in the newspaper and also on the death certificate. And he was 67 years old.
Hi. Did you find any wedding pictures or baptismal or anything from his wife? Did he outlive did his wife pass after him? And
she died 29 years after him. She lived on with various of their daughters in the East 29th Street house. And she drops dead 904, I think it was. And no, one of the obituaries said which church he was supposed to have got married in, and the records, there's no mention of him there getting married in those records. They lived together as man and wife for 40 years. There's no actual proof. I haven't got a marriage certificate or anything.
And no baptismal or nothing?
No, nothing like that.
And no pictures from the children after?
There is, in the book, you'll see there is one picture of the daughter that the survivors of the marriage down today come from. Because she actually married a guy who came from Germany and lives in France. And there's a picture of her taken in France that's towards the back of the book. And as it happens, that several generations down, was doing what everyone seems to do nowadays, amateur genealogy, and went back and suddenly discovered that they had a black man in the family, which they had no idea of before. And this woman allowed me to use the photograph of one of his daughters, and that's the only illustration in the book.
The wife was a New Yorker?
Which wife? Sorry. It's the daughter of Jeremiah, or the wife of Jeremiah Hamilton. Actually comes from Philadelphia, but shifts up here. Some of the early stuff about him suggested that her maiden name is Morris, and it was supposed to be the Morris of the founding fathers, which would have been almost too much, but it's impossible. And as far as I can see from looking, there's no link to that Morris family. But she moved up as a very young girl, and a mother ran a boarding house. A boarding house slash sort of almost a boutique hotel, actually, rather than a boarding house.
There's a question over here. Can you just tell us what prompted the lynching attempt, and also give us a little bit of background in how common lynchings were at that time in New York?
Well, lynching is mostly a southern thing, and during the draft riots, there were several. I think about 10 African Americans were killed, 10, maybe 11. A couple of them were cut up and hung up on lampposts. The draft rights. The draft rights was this sort of racial cataclysm in New York, but it was also the occasion on which a whole lot of little local scores are being settled. And I think that's what's going on. So by looking at the court records here, I picked up testimony from people that it was about 10 o'clock at night, about 22:10, people heard people knocking on doors and whispered saying, let's bring the nigger down, let's bring the nigger down. And then this mob forms and comes, and they're chanting 68, 68, 68. They know where they're going. They're not just looking randomly for African Americans. And the person who spoke to Eliza Jane Hamilton, the wife, on the top of the stairs, said that Jeremiah Hamilton had done him wrong, and that was never explained anywhere as to what the wrong or the slight was. But there was something that seemed to have prompted the leader of the mob of 15 or 20 people who burst into the house who wanted to hang him. And if he had been hung, he would have, just about 4 or 5 blocks over the next day, an African American, a disabled African American, is hauled out of his house, kicked down the block, and then cut up and killed and hung up. And then the militia comes by and says, cut the body down, and they put the body back up, and he's dragged around. It's as I said, probably New York's worst week ever. So lynchings are fairly unusual. They happen, but they're fairly unusual in the North. It's more associated with the South.
First of all, thank you so much. I am honored. I think we're all honored for you to do such remarkable work.
Thank you very much.
So I'm very grateful, very appreciative. I have 2 questions for you. Firstly, did Jeremiah Hamilton, did he try to hide his ethnic identity outside of Wall Street, or did he embrace it in terms of a badge of honor or cultural pride, kind of like I did this in spite of, or?
Again, the lack of evidence is really quite striking. I've got a couple of bits of evidence about this. Sometime in the 1840s or maybe the 1850s, a prominent merchant, a broker, was walking down the street, and Hamilton confronts him in the street and says, I hear you called me nigger, because his name was often done as Nigger Hamilton. And he said, yes, that's true. Yes, you are. And this is told to us by an octogenarian person who wrote a memoir in 1896, I think it was published. And he's telling this, and Hamilton is getting his just desserts. But what I try to do in the book is read it and show actually what he was. The term nigger is being invented in part by New Yorkers in the 1830s and the 1840s. It's used earlier in the 18th century. It takes off with the penny press. It's associated with the end of slavery, and it becomes a way of demarcating and shoving blacks off to the side. And so I read against the grain this account and say, actually, by stepping around and walking on, and he's not at a loss for words, he's just refusing to enter into the discourse, so to speak. In a way, I think you can read the comment, I think you can read this account as something like Hamilton walking on as if he was walking over something, a bit of dog shit on the ground and walking on that way. This same guy also says in a horrible way that this Hamilton insisted on being treated as an equal and riding on the railroads, and also that he was he basically desegregated Delmonico's by going. So other people at the time, interestingly, like Thomas Downing is the African-American businessman who's running an oyster place down on Broad Street near the intersection. And he, although he fights segregation, actually won't allow blacks into his own oyster parlor. So, interestingly, I think Hamilton, he behaved as if he was the equal to every white man and treated them that way, and that included aggression. And so he would be aggressive to them. So I think he cavalierly disregarded the racial ideas of the time and just blithely walked through them. Now, he's protected by money. And that's going to, some poor black peddler on the street is going to have one hell of a time doing some of the things he did. So though he had nothing to do with blacks, he's not like Downing, who writes checks for the civil rights movement all the time. He has nothing whatsoever to do with the other blacks. But he has to live with being a black in New York City at a time, as I said, when segregation is being introduced and invented. And I think he often blithely ignored it and walked through what many white New Yorkers wanted him to do.
Right. He wasn't preoccupied with that, it seems. Secondly, Mr. White, I'm curious as to the relationship between Mr. Hamilton and William Day, who I thought was a pretty interesting gentleman, the owner of the Sun. What was it that bonded these two men? Was it Hamilton being savvy as a financier, an entrepreneur, or a Uber achiever, as Mr. Day was, or was it just something else? What was the essence of, or was it Hamilton being so disruptive to the status quo? What made that such an endearing friendship? What was the essence of that?
Again, the sources are pretty thin, to put it mildly, on this account. I speculate in the book. I actually think that they were two young men on the make in New York in the 1830s who came from outside of New York and were banging their heads against an establishment that put them down, a nasty establishment that was putting them down, both of them down. And I think the two of them identified in part on those grounds. And so Day picks up and writes about Hamilton. In that libel suit I was talking about, it's in part the horror of them being such close friends that comes out. And in particular, at least 25 times, Benjamin Day and Jeremiah Hamilton and another white reporter were cited walking down the streets late at night, drunk, arm in arm. So one of the issues I try to raise in the book is the impossibility of an interracial, not sex, but friendship between two men. And the way the establishment because that libel case is the establishment actually coming down on Benjamin Day for having a black man as a friend. So like interracial sex has been written about a lot, and that too is part of the story here. But I don't think anyone's really considered that issue, that, or if they have, I haven't noticed it, of the difficulty of a black man and a white man being, in this particular time period, the 1830s and 1840s, being friends, and what happens. And these two men are both rich enough to, both the black and the white, they down in the 5 Points, there's all sorts of things going on, but amongst very, very poor blacks. But this is amongst the elite. And this is where white New York stander was got up by Hamilton, and Benjamin Day irritated them as well. The Sun newspaper got up a lot of. I don't know. You've probably got copies of it here. It's a wonderful newspaper. I had such wonderful time just sitting there, just reading the newspaper, and every now and again you're reading and every now and again you just burst out laughing because some of the wordplay and the cleverness of the way Benjamin Day and James Gordon Bennett were at one another's throats for 30 years, or at least 5 years in newspapers. And the wordplay and the cleverness of the insults, I must say, makes me wonder about today's newspapers in comparison, but that's another story.
So you mentioned that Vanderbilt feared no one, he respected Hamilton. Could you elaborate on the lawsuit, please?
The lawsuit, which one?
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt. Oh, well, what Vanderbilt runs Accessory Transit Company, which is a steamship company that runs steamships down to, it's called Greymouth, somewhere in Nicaragua, and they go up the river, across the lake, and then down the other side. So it's before the Panama Canal. It gets stuffed by the eventual building of the Panama Canal as a quick way to San Francisco, prompted by the gold rush. So Vanderbilt does what he always does with all his companies. He ran this as his personal fiefdom. Apparently, according to the court case, the Accessory Transit Company didn't actually have a bank account. Vanderbilt just used his own bank account. Like, it wasn't exactly good bookkeeping. The payments were coming in and out. Hamilton had shares in Accessory Transit, and he sued. And it's listed on the new. The company is founded in Nicaragua, but it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And in New York, Hamilton sues the Accessory Transit Company, and he is imploring the judge to declare, to have a receiver put in and to have everything sold. He loses the case. Now, as it happens, it's one of those, like, trying to read what happened from the bare bones of a court documents down in the New York County Clerk's office is often very, very difficult. And it seems that something else is going on. And in fact, there is a suggestion that Vanderbilt and Hamilton were actually, this was a rigged lawsuit going on, and there was something funny going on. One of them, I said there were 4 mentions of Hamilton. One of them, and 3 of them were wrong. One of them said that Hamilton was in a history of steamships in California. Said that that Hamilton was married to Vanderbilt's daughter, which wasn't the case. And there's this suggestion of links between the two that comes through in the obituaries. So the thing I play around with in the book, I mentioned that the consortium of New York merchants funded the 1828 counterfeit coin in Haiti. And Hamilton knows who they are, but never names them, though he's sort of threatening as the big kerfuffle's going on in New York City. My suggestion, and it's scandalous what I do because I have absolutely no proof that this is the case. I actually think Vanderbilt was one of them. And I think there's a link that goes back there, and I think they're playing funny buggers, and I can't get at it. The whole book, in a way, is a book about writing a book about someone when the sources are so very, very thin. And so a couple of times you'll see me, if you happen to read the book, you'll see me say, at this point, like a novelist or a filmmaker would actually seize on this, or I actually say that that idea about Vanderbilt having funded that conspiracy in 1828, I say, if I was a filmmaker, this would be my rosebud, as in referring to Citizen Kane. This would be the thing I would use to drive the film through. But I got no proof. And the guy who won the Pulitzer Prize for the biography of Vanderbilt, and all those books about Vanderbilt, you look at, they never mention this guy. They never mention Hamilton, even though this case went on through the 1850s, even though Vanderbilt, I contacted them, and they sort of, there's sort of a mixture of embarrassment that they had not seen him, and they just dismiss out of hand anything I say about possible Vanderbilt being involved in this. That could be right. I don't know. The touchiness of authors when someone finds that things are wrong or they've forgotten obvious things is interesting.
Just pause for a second, just so we have these kind of instructions. We've got one question over here, we've got one more question here, and here, and then maybe we'll close with that.
Okay. Just another question. I know that his granddaughter, I believe, recently had something on YouTube where his granddaughter, we're talking about Jeremiah Hamilton.
Jeremiah Hamilton's granddaughter.
One of his relatives wrote a book. She was endorsing it. I was wondering if you had any knowledge of that, or if any of his family or descendants supported.
Well, I've been in touch with the descendant of the family, and as I said, they supplied the photograph of Jeremiah Hamilton's daughter. The granddaughter. There's a grandson who has a very, very hard life and is buried out in Greenwood. But I don't know what you're talking about on the.
Only other thing I want to ask you is one last thing. You mentioned something that I thought was incredible. This gentleman was a Black pioneer, to use your parlance. And most Black pioneers, Jackie Robinson, a few, were more polite and deferential to larger society. He seems to be the complete opposite.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, was that attitude picked up? I know there was Jack Johnson, the first Black heavyweight champion, had some of the same behavioral tendencies. So I'm wondering if there was can you give me your supposition on that, or what do you think?
Well, I don't think Jack Johnson and Jeremiah Hamilton's paths or knowledge of one another would ever have come close to one another. Jack Johnson, of course, became heavyweight champion of the world in Sydney, Australia, about 5 miles away from where I live. I used to walk past it every day as a school child on the way to sport. The site where he did it. Yes, well, yeah. Well, Jackie Robinson was made to be differential. Like, he was champing at the bit, and every now and again, it was obvious to anyone watching him that he wasn't very happy. But there is no restraint on Jeremiah Hamilton, and he, as you know, the guy I was talking about, he jumps in front of him on the street and said, "I hear you've been calling me nigger." He confronts him over that. And that, to me, like, my difficulty, and I've been working in African American history for 35 years now. Like, Martin Luther King is a saint, but he is totally beyond my understanding. Turning the other cheek is not part of my makeup. That's part of the reason I find Hamilton appealing, is he wasn't going to turn the other cheek. If someone hits him, he was going to go straight for the throat. And in 1836, two white businessmen who are in a dispute with Hamilton arranged to have Hamilton arrested at 11 o'clock at night up in Bloomingdale, specifically so he can't raise bail, which he could easily, and have him spend the night in prison. About 2 weeks later, those two white guys are hauled out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the bail is so high that they can't make it, and they spend a couple of days. Again, you hit him, he comes straight back at your throat. And I find that immensely appealing, cheering from the sidelines.
1845, brokers at the New York Stock Exchange are not allowed to buy or sell for Hamilton. What preceded that specifically, having to do specifically with the New York Stock Exchange?
It wasn't the New York Stock Exchange, it's the second board, or the new board, as it's called, of the stock exchange. This resolution was passed, it was personal, and I have looked through the stock exchange. I have looked through newspapers. I can't find any more details than the ones I've pieced together from, believe it or not, the New Orleans Picayune was one of the newspapers that publishes a little bit of the story there. They passed the resolution, but quote unquote, the Hebrew faction arranged to have the passage of this thing put to one side and a committee to look at it, and it seems to have dropped after that. So as soon as they passed it, the chairman of the stock exchange thought to himself, we can't do this. And so the Hebrew faction arranged to have it. The details of it, I don't know what they are. And so I'm afraid, like, I think I've uncovered a lot through some almost Herculean research, but often people will ask questions like that, and all I can say is, you know, I don't know. I can guess, or I can hazard a guess, but it's which, and that too was part of the difficulty, as I've mentioned, of writing the book.
One last question.
So you talk about New York City inventing at that time Jim Crow and segregation. Can you talk particularly about on public transportation? And I'm thinking of the trial that you mentioned of Downey, the oyster businessman.
New York goes from being a walking city to being a city that's sprawling all over the place, and you can no longer walk around. Public transport becomes more and more important. And as segregation is being invented, like, you can get at this from foreigners coming here. The British or English travelers couldn't understand that class was not a factor here. You could be a very rich black man, but you're just treated like ordinary black men. They thought this was insane. The fact that a barber could not shave a black man if he wanted his white business just struck most European travelers as insane. Hamilton is the Europeans' sort of picture boy in a way, because he is a wealthy black man who can't be treated like a white on public transport. So the trains, and the most important one is the one that runs up, God, oh, we're going to get this wrong now, 3rd Avenue, I think it is. It runs up to Harlem. It's the Harlem Railroad. So beneath 27th Street, it's drawn by horses. Above 27th Street, they're allowed to use steam engines. And it is segregated. But the segregation isn't that enforced. And so blacks travel on it. And mostly the train company that doesn't really worry about it, but every now and again they do. Thomas Downing, there are the two richest black men in New York, Thomas Downing and Jeremiah Hamilton. Thomas Downing is paying taxes on $90,000 worth of real estate, which is a fortune, in 1845. He gets on a train in 1840 on church business. And he goes up to 14th Street, and he's coming back down again. He gets on the train, and the white conductor, several white conductors, end up beating him up and then tossing him off the back of the train. Downing then goes to the train company and he sues. And he goes to the train company to identify the people there. The chairman of the Harlem Railroad comes down, and he's a friend of Downing. And he's utterly horrified. He hears the story of what his employees have done. He fires them straight away. But Downing sues. He also has this other one. When they tossed him off, they busted his hat. And so Downing says to the chairman when he's standing there, "Oh, they stuffed my hat up." And the chairman actually says to Downing, a black man, "Go and buy yourself a new one, I'll pay for it," which I think is one of those interesting moments in race relations in this city that is not really what you sort of expect. So the case goes forward, and it's a fascinating case because the white executives of the railroad company are embarrassed by the segregation and the imposition of it and the violence that has to be used, and they're squirming. But the audience watching it is against, is for segregation. And so when the actual conductor and the driver come on, they say, not only were we right, but I'd do it again. We've got to segregate these people or the world's going to come to an end. There's cheers. The jury goes out and is out for 23 seconds and then comes back in, and it goes against Thomas Downing, and the court erupts into cheers. So this was in 1841. And it's one of those things where an optimist can see the future in the embarrassment of the white elite at the way segregation is going. But for those poor bastards who are black and who are living in New York in the 1840s, they're going to have to live with the crowd cheering. And that's going to be the way it's going to carry on until 1850s. As it happens, there's another case involving Thomas Downing again, 18 years later, in which the crowd ends up pushing the drivers refuse to drive the car on. And a white crowd ends up yelling out 3 cheers for Downing and pushing the carriage down the street. So things, by the time almost of the Civil War, things on the row are beginning to change.
Dr. White, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
We do have books for sale in the Peluso Family Exhibition Gallery, and I'm sure our speaker would be happy to sign a copy for you. Thank you.